Sure.
So he just went to where the meeting,
Three calendar.
whichever meeting they told him to go to. That's
That sounds like our friend over here.
Uh-huh.
She just describes everything with him.
Yep.
So they're still doing that. I never know when she's there or not. It's just kind of bizarre world right now.
Very good. I'd like to welcome everyone to the joint city council and planning commission meeting for Wednesday, December 16th, 2020. We'll start the work meeting with first an approval of minutes for September 30th, 2020.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion by Sherry, second by Lauren. All in favor?
Aye.
And just to make sure, since we have some online. And then from there, we'll move on to item 1.2, which is a discussion of draft general plan update. And we'll look for Michael Malloy, city staff, to start with that, and then also Susie from FSKR.
Thank you. As the council and commission knows, in your packet, you received links to online versions of the draft general plan, which includes a future land use map and several chapters of the general plan document. This is, of course, a first draft. This is certainly a milestone that we have all been very anxious to get to. And our consultant, Susie Pepperam, is on tonight. As indicated in the staff memo in your packet, what we wanted to discuss mainly is just kind of next steps. Where do we go from here? What does that process look like? We're looking for feedback from the commission and council on how much do we engage the public at this point in time. As the commission and council knows, we've done a lot of outreach in the past, but that was all pre-COVID. We have not had, because of COVID, really any outreach for most of this year. We are required by law to have at least one public hearing. It's been my understanding that based on our previous experience in our last general plan amendment, that we're anticipating having a public hearing with the commission and council. However, we're looking for confirmation on that tonight as far as what kind of schedule we would like to see the consultant engage you all in. Also, if you have any early kind of comments on the draft that you received in your packet, you're welcome to identify those tonight in this meeting. However, it may be more effective possibly if we communicate that information directly to our consultant through email, and she'll provide that contact information for you tonight. So with that, I'll just go ahead and turn over the time to Susie, and I'm not sure, John, if she has a short presentation or not. So you might need to turn that time over to her for control.
All right. Hi, everybody.
Hello,
Let me
Susie.
know if you can.
We can hear you.
Great, you can hear me. I can hear everybody. I can't see anything, so just wanted to make sure that was the situation all around. Can you see the slide on the screen that I'm sharing now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So really just, short presentation, as Michael mentioned in his staff report. Really our goal for tonight is just to acknowledge the milestone and where we are. And for the discussion framework tonight, we just wanted to keep it pretty straightforward, where we are right now, where we go from here, and how you can contribute. So where we are, we sent out the draft plan chapters in their kind of final formatted layout, and then also the future land use map, both the PDFs and then the online version of the story map format, where you could go through and kind of use the slider to see what's changed between the existing future land use map and the draft map that we've been working with the Planning Commission to create over the last few months. And then, we also just included some narrative of each of the different future land use categories. The idea with that story map is that that is going to be one of the public engagement tools that we can use so that we can have some of those resources online to get the community informed and engaged about where we are with the draft plan. Where we go from here, this is sort of a end to beginning flow of the process. And so, starting at the top, like that's where we need to get to, is that final adoption by the City Council, working down through those steps. The City Council, has the option of holding a public hearing before the adoption is made final. Before the public hearing, it'd go into a work session, where in that work session, you would be seeing the final draft plan and all of the comments that were generated by the Planning Commission during their work session and public hearing. The Planning Commission, going through that public hearing with the work session, looking at the draft plan before the public hearing, just so that in that hearing, that's something where we can say, here's the draft plan and here are the comments that the Planning Commission has on it in its current state. Before we get to that process, we go through that refinement, and that's assembling the community feedback from the dialogue process. And from that process, we either go the direction of making some minor refinements and then getting the final plan to the Planning Commission, or we end up hearing a lot of ideas or comments that require some more major refinements, and then getting it to the Planning Commission before that. When you look down in that engage and dialogue component, what we're proposing is a series of online town halls. I think there's two ways that we could go about that. We could structure them either by the key topics and chapters of the plan and hold a separate town hall in each of those. Or we could look at doing something by council district and cover each of the topics, possibly with a city council person and a planning commissioner being co-hosts of that town hall. So those are two options for doing the town hall series. Before we get to that stage, though, we want to just get out there and inform the public, help them understand where we are, just doing a series of online sound bites, similar to what the Parks Department has doing with the park proposals, sort of those quick 1-minute sound bites covering the key topics, and letting people know where they can go to look at the draft, but just giving them that quick 1-minute overview of each of the key elements of the general plan. So where we go from here, that's sort of the flow and how you can contribute. Tonight, if there's any key points that we want to talk about, we want to bring those up. If there's also, as you're looking at those key initiatives, the goal of this general plan really is for it to be a usable, useful document for you in your decision-making process. And so with those key initiatives, what we want to know and what we want to communicate with the plan is, what are the metrics that we can associate with each of those initiatives that are going to help you use those to make decisions. And so if there's any specific feedback in that regard, I know we've talked about this in the past when we're looking at things like what's our balance and mix of housing, where are we now, what's our target, what sort of tax revenue are projects bringing in, how many businesses do we have, how many are we trying to get to, how are the decisions that you're making as a planning commission and as a city council furthering those key initiatives and overall vision and goals of the general plan. So that's all we have as far as a presentation. We just wanted to meet with you, hear some feedback, and just give you that overview of what we're thinking for the next steps and getting to that final stage of adopting the general plan. Michael, did you have anything to add?
No, like I said, our main objective is just identifying those next steps and moving forward.
And so looking at what you provided, Susie, I think the question that this body needs to answer is what the next steps, and maybe go back to the last slide.
Okay. All right.
Is if we want to look at the town hall or engaging the public in a town hall series, and if that's going to be based around each district having one, or maybe we're having 2 or 3 with different action plans on how to do that, and maybe get some feedback from this body on their thoughts of what they'd like to see.
Yep. Yeah, that would be great.
Maybe we'll
And
ask-
another, yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
another format I was just going to say is, we also have the community outreach facilitators that could be just a resource as far as, co-hosts for these town halls. I think the idea is to get people engaged and essentially, conduct it maybe in a little bit more of a reverse town hall format where, you provide them the information, give a brief presentation, but then, you structure it where it's like, hey, we have some questions and we want to get your feedback on, A, B, and C, and kind of outline some of the key components of the different sections of the general plan, and just get that feedback and comments from the public of like, is this moving in the right direction? Do you have some serious comments? How are we doing with where things are in the plan as it stands?
Okay, and then just the other question I have for you is the public hearing. Is that something that's going to be at this point with the city council, Michael? Is that the next step with it, the public hearing?
So the public hearings with the planning commission, that's required prior to commission making the recommendation to the council. A second hearing with the council is not required by law.
Okay.
So it's just a question of whether or not the council would like us to plan for that step, an extra step in the process.
Are you asking the council what we want to do on that? I always like to err on the side of give the public as many opportunities to have a hearing as possible. So my opinion would be to have the public hearing in front of the city council.
I'm in agreement with that as well, with Sherry there. I think that this is probably one of the most important things that we do as a council. It is the guiding document for the city. And so I think that having an opportunity for the public to speak directly to the council is important and valid, and we should take that opportunity. We've been working on this for years. An extra week or two so that we can get the public's input is definitely something that we should be doing.
An opinion on the town hall series?
What? I'm having a hard time hearing.
The town hall series?
So
What Susie just talked about?
I'm not sure we need to have a town hall series per se. COVID has kind of changed the way that everyone operates. I do think that we need to make, once we've had more of a chance to digest and give input as this body and as the planning commission, changes we'd like to see. I think that we need to make this available online and make sure that we're pushing out to our residents so there's an opportunity for them to give us feedback online. But in the format that we received it in, where we can literally wave back and forth and see the the exact changes on that same map, I think is going to be the most helpful for the residents to see what changes are going and what, because let's be honest, the thing that we get the most feedback on is usually the zoning map. And so seeing that, I think is the best way to see it.
Yeah, and that's the main reason that we spent the time to create that format, is because we felt that would be the most useful for you, but also for the public to understand the changes and the future land use map. But also, that's a tool, I mentioned this to Michael, that I think that's something that we can work with your city GIS department to transfer some of that information. And I see that as a potential tool for the city moving forward. It's like when you receive a request for a zone change or a future land use change, having it set up so that you can use that type of resource while you're in your meeting and deliberating for the public to see. It's a great visual resource.
I do have a question about the zoning maps. I'm seeing a lot of different colors than what I'm used to.
Okay.
And is part of that because we're adding additional zones? I'm having a little bit just trying to make sure that I'm seeing, looking at the exact same thing and making sure that I'm understanding what it is. It was a little hard from the legend that's provided on the website to tell exactly what those zones are supposed to be as I look at the map. I don't think we have an educational campus zone per se. I mean, so are we making changes to our ordinance as well as part of this? That's one of my questions as we're going through this, because that's going to be a substantial change that the city council is going to have to talk about before we go through. I'm just looking for information on that.
Yeah, so right now there are some new categories. These are just future land use categories, so they aren't triggering zone changes with the adoption of the future land use map. It could be that with some of these, if you see in the draft document, each of the future land use categories has existing zones that are associated with that category. That's not to say that you might discover like, hey, our existing categories, zoning categories may need to be updated or changed, or maybe there's a new one that's going to better capture this vision. But with the adoption of the general plan and the new future land use categories, it's not automatically triggering any zone changes.
However, Susie, any new land use designations, if a new zoning district were needed to implement that designation, that would be an action item. That would be a recommendation in the general plan, correct?
Correct, yes.
So maybe my question to this body, particularly the members of the planning commission, is I'd like to hear as a member of the council your thoughts on I think I already know what your thoughts are going to be, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on adding additional zones and kind of the zones that have been proposed out of this particular draft, if that's more in line with what the planning commission was hoping for, or if we still need additional additional categories per se I know part of the frustration from the planning commission over time has been we don't have good zones to fit what's being asked, so we're trying to cram projects into a zone that maybe aren't quite right. Does this address that issue? Does it not address that issue? I'm kind of looking for your
there's a
feedback.
couple items, and I'll let the rest of the planning commission talk as well, but a couple items just address your question. One, you'll see some of these areas are certain zones that if you were to look at, they've not been built on yet. And you would think in your mind, okay, that might not be the ideal zone of what we want there, but they already have master development agreements put in place for certain areas. So when it really came down to the area that did not have something in place with the landowner, with master development agreements, with developers, with builders, there was some proposals or some recommendations on how to use that area. And then some of the changes that are on this are actually to become more in line with what these master development agreements are. And so there's sort of a balancing act of trying to change it to what we currently have allowed in the city, and then sort of going outside of that because there's not as much area as we all would like to hope there is. But there is some different recommendations. Some of that's with what goes towards Porter Rockwell, recommendations on things down there and everything else. But I'll let the rest of the planning commission talk as well.
Well, I'll say, I think what you're getting at, we wanted to be more specific than just commercial, just regular commercial. We wanted to be more, commercial can be a wide variety of things. I think we've even gotten into it as, in this body, but, there's retail or it's not. I mean, we all recognize retail is not the only commercial out there. So we wanted to, open it up to more, specific what we pictured in that area. Same thing with the residential. As our body we've talked about, we don't want just, I think our developing partners come in and they just look at the range of the density range, and they maximize that. Where we're trying to now, I think this new plan helps us specify more to our developer partners what we really want to see in these. So yes, I think this comes from our discussions, a lot of these zoning. So yeah. Correct, yeah, we picture that being kind of an extension. I mean, office, we feel like there's potential to grab that along Redwood. If there is any area for that in the city, it'd be over in there.
I think maybe a good tool to help us understand the issue that the mayor identified is if we, Susie, if we could create a chart or table that shows our existing land use designations, show where they are similar to the proposed designations, and then as part of that, we can also identify the new designations. So we can look at what's similar and what's new, and then do the same thing with the zoning categories. Each of these land use designations should equate or relate to an existing zoning category, or identify that a new zone will be, requested or proposed in order to implement the general plan. I think that would really help everyone to see how it relates to what we have now and what this is encouraging the city to move towards.
And I do remember there was one zoning that we talked about, and specifically out towards more of the land that's appropriate for horse country, to where it may allow some changes in smaller house sizes on larger lots so that they can have a barn and they can have horses and things like that. Because I know sometimes, and especially those individuals that are big horse people, sometimes they could care less if they had much of a house. I remember one of my good friends from Wyoming, and he's like, I'd be perfectly happy in a small home and a huge horse barn. And so we did talk about something like that, but I think input from the city council and those specifically in those districts that could accommodate something like that, input would need to be put in. There was different conversations like that have been had as well. And so we've looked at, we've evaluated, we think we've came with some suggestions and recommendations to Susie that hopefully it'll all be presented to you in a good way to where you can look at it and really evaluate it. The understanding of what we currently have built and what's still proposed and that's coming based off townhomes and multifamily homes and single family homes. She presented the numbers to us on a lot of those. That was interesting. There was a lot of information that was shared with us to really help open our eyes with some of the stuff that is coming, and then some of the stuff that's still needed. There's a large push for those, for no better words, the small warehouse type facilities. You see some of it off of Porter Rockwell right now. Those seem to be becoming more popular for commercial use because they like the little warehouse feel that they can use and adapt easily. We talked about maybe a zone that accommodates for that more so, but then at the same time limits certain things that would not be allowed to go in there. And so there's been a lot of conversations that we've had and trying to understand what we think some of the needs are that are not really being answered very well. And then there's also the thoughts of, do big box really make sense anymore? And is that something we want in our city? And so there's been a lot that's been talked about, and I think some of what's been presented to us needs to be presented to you as well if it hasn't, so that you can look at it from a different perspective, and then the public comments, and then there's probably a need to sit down and talk through it again with a list of all the questions to see if there's input from both sides that need to be further addressed. But I think Susie's definitely done a pretty good job with where we're at this point, and it's probably been pretty painful because we're not always the nicest on the planning commission.
You guys are great.
Just like to go back and make a comment about something a little earlier about all serious. I'm not really sure sure that town hall series is the right word for it, or just the right format. But I think there needs to be some for us to engage with the public in this process, not using COVID as an excuse to not engage with them.
Yeah. But we should definitely, Steve, I agree, we should definitely do that.
So, I mean, there are, for lack of a better term, many of the members of the planning commission would like to see as part of this process. And the members of the city council would like to see as part of this plan. There are staff ideas and projects and biases and experiences and ideas that go into this plan. But the most important part is going to be public input, and that's something that needs to be really put into the final project here. And I know it's difficult to get our public to engage in lengthy meetings and long discussions about big topics like this, but I think there's an onus upon us to really do everything we can to encourage those formats, and not just in a public hearing when we're making a decision, but as part of the evolution and finalization of this process. So,
Steve, I hope I may have not been clear in my request earlier. I do think that we need to have at least one town hall. I just don't think we need to have a full series of them where we have them in all the different districts. I think we definitely need to have an opportunity for residents to come in, not during a meeting, a regular city council meeting, here to City Hall to be able to engage and give input. My concern was, I don't think we need to do that out in the city, in every district, having multiple meetings where there's just not going to be.
and we could do it virtually. We could do it.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily have to be in-person meetings. We're on.
Correct, yeah, these would be planned for an online format. And I had talked to John about the different options the city has available, and just using the GoToMeeting format to do a presentation. Like I said, we could set it up so that there's some questions that you pose back out to the public, and then having some Q&A and discussion. The nice thing about some of those online meetings is that not everybody will be able to or choose to participate in the live stream version, but then have those recorded so that people can then go back and watch them later on their own schedule, and feel like that they have the opportunity to hear what's going on, hear some of the dialogue, and then that may trigger their own comments or responses, like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, I hadn't thought about that, and that makes me think of something else that I feel is important to contribute.
So,
Put it out there, I'd like, very few times do we get to see the council interact with just your district, just, I think it'd be great for you guys to meet. We've got a very engaged public right now. Harriman's always had a very engaged social media presence. I think it'd be a great offer. I think you could do it still in a week or two. I don't think this extends it very often, very long. But I think having council by council.
you could literally have them 4 days in a row if you chose.
And
I
that's
think
not me. That's
the
I mean,
important
that's
thing to what you're saying though is that having the meetings with members of the council or planning commission directly is a direct effort to kind of counteract, or at least get into the public realm, the truth instead of some of the misinformation or wrong their information.
correct.
And Susie's done a good job of sort of breaking down what changes are occurring in districts, and what's coming in the districts. Some of these measures yeah, so and I think there was 4 or 5 bars. So in this area, well, even myself didn't realize, and I should have known better, but they front load all their multifamily homes, and then they come later with all their single family residents. So we are way behind on what's coming with that. And so to be able to see that and address that in these town meetings, saying, okay, here's what this area is seeing, and then hear what's going on, because there's still some differing things that can occur. For instance, down off of Mountain View and 134, we have a piece of land that can potentially be used as a park or a theater later or different things like that. And to sort of hear the input or different things like that it's always useful, I think. Now, I have opinions of where you put a theater next to our commercial, but that's a whole different thing. And so it's just, I like the format of breaking up by the districts because I think the districts have different concerns. And I think some of them will lean towards, we don't have any gyms. We don't have any extra things that we can attend in our area. And that might be a concern. Or they might say, I don't want to have any of that here. Leave that on the other half of the city. And so I like the format of breaking it up in at least some way. Maybe it's not specifically by each district, but in a way where you can get input in a certain area instead of the whole city. I think it becomes a little difficult when you're looking at the whole city perspective. You might do your specific area and then what are other thoughts about the whole city? Here's our district. Now, what's your thoughts about the rest of the city? And I think you can get a lot of really valuable input from the community.
Yeah, comment here. I think that's a great idea because then you'll really get down to what you can actually do. I think you look at the whole map and it's a lot to take in. If you look at it as a district and you say, hey, these are the master development agreements we have in place, that's what it is. What are our actual options? Like what can we actually do inside of our district and have more of an influence on what's actionable instead of saying, oh, I don't want this to turn into multifamily, and lo and behold, it's a master development agreement that's multifamily already. Then you can say, hey, this is what we already have. What can we do better with what we can have, I guess, optionality with? Does that make sense?
So I guess the question for this body for Susie is the timeline of how we want to present this and how you guys want to do it. Do you want to do it in 3 or 4 meetings in district? Do you want to do it in one town hall meeting, for no better words? Because she's trying to put the timeline together, and I think that is the question we need to help her with.
A meeting with my district.
Okay.
Yeah, ditto me too. I mean, I've already been looking through it. And I mean, even just in certain chunks, I'm like, wow, that's all neighborhood commercial. Those guys just built a new house right there. They probably don't want that to be neighborhood commercial. Just so people understand the changes that will really impact our area. And this used to be agricultural. Now we're renaming it just residential stuff. And so that, even though I can see there's still things allowed, but it changes the way people perceive it. So.
And Michael, if there's one other thing I could make a suggestion for you and Susie, I think it would be really, really illustrative to our residents to see, here are the parts of Harriman that are already entitled that we have no say or options to change or alter at this point. That is such a frustration for our residents. They believe that the current city council or current planning commission approved something that's being built right now when it was actually approved 10 or 12 or 15 years ago. So I think if you could show that on a map, here's the areas where we actually have some say and control over, and here's the areas that we don't, that would be very, very helpful.
And one thing to think about with that, Steve, is sometimes you'll get input back from the city saying, is there a way to have the park moved more here or here? Because that we can do little things like that sometimes, but we can't. They're getting 2,000 units in that area.
Yeah.
Now, how that's being laid out, that's a different thing, but they're getting that. And so that's the time to ask those type of questions, saying, so they are going to put a park in there that's about 5 acres or whatever it might be. Is there areas where you think it would be better? I mean, it's just one way to get the limited input you can actually have some influence over.
So I do have a question that Sherry just started to bring up. I'm seeing a lot of change in, for example, agriculture residential. we're basically removing the term agriculture from, from the plan at this point. As I'm looking at it and as I'm seeing, we are basically, removing that, type that zone. I mean, we're basically going to a rural or hillside or whatever we're calling it. And I'm fine with, changing the density zone so that it's a little bit more specific of what we want in that area, that we want the low density, hillside, rural type feel. But I think if we remove the agriculture term, we are now signaling to our residents that we are basically fundamentally changing what we're looking to be as a city. Now, if that's something that the council and the planning commission want to do, that's one thing. But I don't think that that's the intent of either one of these bodies, is to say, we're no longer going to allow somebody to have a couple of sheep or some pigs or even, a horse on their property in some of these areas because we've changed the term, from agriculture. So I'm fine with, making some adjustments, but especially in this area on the west side of the city, where we're going, a huge chunk of area that's being changed out of agriculture. I think that's going to cause some heartache among some of our residents about what we're looking to do. And I don't think that's in any way the intent. And so I think that maybe massaging the names, maybe rural agriculture, just something so that it's clear that we're not intending to change, what the makeup of the city is. I think that we all, that's something that our mission statement says that we plan on trying to protect. And so the other issue that I see is there's a few places, and I think it's kind of a two-sided sword here. I think there's a lot of great places where the new plan has added like neighborhood commercial, indicating we're looking for things like maybe a gas station and a convenience store or something, on that particular corner. But I'm also seeing some places where there's commercial that the planning commission changed the general plan on specifically to indicate that those areas are going to be commercial, and that they're now no longer showing that area that we changed as entirely commercial. And so I have some concerns about making those changes in this format without having the city council, come to an agreement that we want to do one thing or another on that commercial zoning. Being that the body made that specific decision on those, I believe it was 10 parcels, that we specifically said, these are commercial parcels. And now some of them are getting divided up a little bit, making adjustments. I just like, before that happened, I'd like the council to have a chance to weigh in and say, hey, this is what, was the intent. And unless there's a clear decision, one way or another from the body, that we be careful about dividing those up.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
I mean, for example, the one that sticks out to me is the piece down on, by the high school, by Mountain Ridge, that, yes, that property is owned by the school, but we zoned that as commercial, and we zoned that entire part as commercial. And if we change in the plan what we're expecting to go there, I'm uncomfortable doing that at this time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And of course,
the council
coun-
might feel differently.
yeah, and the council, of course, will have the last review and the final decision on that. The comment about agricultural, the agricultural designations in the general plan draft, we all know that a lot of our agricultural zones have been developed in more traditional or typical suburban, development patterns. This is just trying to reflect where do we really have a low density neighborhood versus agricultural use. I'm sure it does need more adjustment. But that was that first effort of just trying to reflect what is actually being used in the property. But I agree with you. I think that preserving that agricultural heritage and making sure we have agriculture uses in places that are presently being used that way, or that the community prefers, that is the future plan for that neighborhood.
And I think
That is
it's
certainly our objective.
I think it's an important goal that we should try to, at this point, for the stuff that is developed out, our general plan should reflect what's already there, right? Unless we want to really go in and say, hey, we want something different. So I'm supportive of that. I would just hate for those residents who have agriculture rights right now to all of a sudden think, oh, the general plan says we're trying to do something different. So if we could just massage it a little bit so that it's clear that that's not the intent. We're just trying to show what's actually there.
So again, the rights are associated with the zone. The general plan would guide any future zoning amendments, but so it wouldn't take away any existing rights.
I'm aware of that. Residents may not be.
Yeah, it's like where it says, it's the neighborhood residential one, where you can have 8.5, 8.25. Well, 8.5, you can have a horse, but it just says neighborhood residential. It doesn't really reflect
Yeah.
some of the other agricultural uses that are allowed in
That's a
those
good
areas.
comment. Good comment.
I'm thinking about the subdivisions that we're gonna get where somebody wants to divide up their house to give one to their child, the property, give one house to the child. And now all of a sudden, to do that, they're gonna have to rezone and they're not gonna have the ability to have a horse on that property.
This was an initial effort to try and simplify some of our
Oh, sure.
designations. But in the process, we also recognize that we may need to take a step back and break up some of those designations to be more accurate. So,
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Is there anything else that you need, Susie, to help out with the timeline? She might be muted. All right, I'll
I'm
answer that.
unmuted now.
Oh, there you go.
I was just typing to John. I was like, without the camera, I have most of your voices down, but it's not always easy to tell who's making which comments. So,
Okay. Yeah, that was the mayor talking to Michael,
That's right.
and then Sherry as well.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So, yes, I appreciate all of those comments, and I think you're correct, and that's definitely not the intent. And I think what we're trying to show with the different categories is sort of not only what type of development is intended to happen there, but what type of animal rights are going to continue. Is this an urban center where you're just going to have your dog or your cat, or are you up in the hillside where you might have those goats and the sheep and the cows and the horses. So trying to communicate that visually in the plan is one of our objectives, just because we know that is just a key element of how people associate different neighborhoods of Harriman and their view of how they want them to continue in the future.
I just think it's important even for future landowners, like if somebody moves into a neighborhood and they're assuming it's residential and my cows start bawling at night, they might be mad,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
So I just
exactly.
think it's important to identify that.
Great. And then,
Yeah.
Susie, just one recommendation that when you present this to the council that I felt like was very useful was be able to just have the before and after, probably side by side in the slides of what is before and then what is already been changed because of master development agreements and everything else. And then after that, what is decision areas? Because I think even with this, when we mention agricultural, we have areas on the old general map that already have master development agreements, and you're just trying to get those areas more in line with what
Right.
already has been approved. But the old general plan doesn't reflect that yet. And so if we can try to format in there, I think it'll help us to see it a little bit better in the city council, because I know that was useful for us when we went through that on a lot of one-on-ones. And then you had the map where you were able to change what you were looking at. That was pretty fancy, and so it was helpful.
So
Yeah.
I want to hop in here. This is the mayor again. I hesitate to go with a carte blanche. This has already been approved, so this is what it has to be.
Oh no, not by any means.
But I've heard a couple of times something like, we're trying to show it as it is now. I think there's a lot of value to that, but I also think that once again, we get requests, the council gets requests all the time to make slight tweaks to what a plan is or what an amendment, we get amendment
Correct.
requests to these MDAs. So I think it's important that even if it's something that we've already gone through the process with, that we're careful not to just carte blanche say, well, that's already been approved, so that's what we can't make a change to it now, but there is a chance that a developer might come back later and say, I want something different. And the general plan is supposed to indicate what we want in those areas, even if it's not the same as what's there now. And so I think
Right.
that there is some value to not just brushing them off and saying, this is, we have to do exactly what there is. If there's somewhere that we've maybe not quite happy with what the product we got, we might be able to say, hey, maybe we did actually want commercial on this corner, or hey, maybe we wanted a little bit more, parks in this area, or whatever, just to throw that in there, even though it might be different than what's on that map. Because if they come back and want a zoning change for something different, that supports our ability to go as a body to go back and say, well, this is what our general plan says. This is what we want to go in there if you want something different. And so I think there's some value to that. I'm not saying that we should, drop everything and go replan the entire city by any means. But if there are places where we might have some concerns from what's been approved in the past, this is an opportunity to take a look at those and say, well, this is a general map of what we would like, even if it's not exactly what's there in the future. If you want to change it, this is maybe what we want to see. So I just want to I'm just hesitant when we keep saying, well, it's already approved. It's already approved. It might already be approved, but we have areas on the general plan that aren't even in our city. So, there's some value to still looking at it.
I'm going to verbalize something here. It may not be extraordinarily productive, but I'm going to verbalize. Anyway, there's an aspect about this process that has been frustrating me all along. And that is the fact that we are talking about land use plans on land that's already developed. I don't understand the value in the process of changing land use map on land that's already developed, let alone entitled. It seems, for lack of a better term, an utter waste of time. We can't change 5,000 houses that already exist in neighborhoods. We can say we want neighborhood commercial there. We're not going to tear down 500 houses to build commercial in them. It just doesn't, you can't comprehend why that's part of this process. There are really only very few areas inside the boundaries of Harriman, and possibly just outside the boundaries of Harriman, so we can have any possible influence or say over. And that, I think, is where the attention needs to be focused. When I look at the map, the smart map that shows what was and what is, there's 150 little changes in neighborhoods that are already existing. I don't understand what that's for, or why that is existing. And that is going to really irritate residents if they think there's something now entitled to change inside their residential neighborhood, or change inside a business area, or change inside an agricultural zone. And I want to make sure that that in this process, especially when we go through these town halls, that it's very, very much clear to our residents what we are proposing as changes for the future of Harriman, and what we really don't have any opportunity to change.
Thank you, Steve, and valid, you made some very valid comments. There are areas of ability. Like you said, there are just many neighborhoods we know won't change, right? We know that they've been developed and they're going to stay that way for decades. And there are other areas that will be subject to future change. One thing that I have learned in my career, that even in a highly developed community, you will find over time that people will look at their property and think that there is another way to use it. There is something that I can do differently with my property. And so even though it's been developed once, there will come a time where we may see some development pressure to change things. So it still is valuable to have a general plan designation for a developed neighborhood and zoning, regulations. Another thing that I think this plan is trying to do, a lot of the development patterns that have been permitted were not because of the MDA, and we've allowed for densities to be moved and condensed in some places. Some of the development patterns don't really match what the general plan or even the zoning ordinance says. For example, we have a pretty good sized neighborhood that was developed in the FR 2.5 zone, which is a 2.5 acre zoning minimum. And that's just a regular, quarter acre lot subdivision. So we're trying to bring some of the land use types and zoning designations in line with what's been built. Another kind of,
I can understand, and I really do, but I also understand
if we were in a process or an evolution in our time where we were talking about redevelopment areas or stuff like that, I could see that being really valuable. Or whether it's possible, but
yeah.
I mean, homes that have been existing for 6 or 8 years. I mean, Harriman's only 20 years old. We're not talking about redevelopment areas yet.
We
you
can
know?
request redevelopment
And
all the time. I mean, how, we have to change the ordinance just for that reason.
Yeah.
Because we were getting requests all the time to put a house behind another house, which is an extension.
I understand, but we are asking for flag lots to build neighborhood commercial. That's the difference, right?
That's fair, but I think what Michael's trying to say is there's always the potential to change, even if it's 20 years down or 30 years or 40 or 50 years down the road. It's our job as this body to plan for it, even if it is going to be 50 or 60 years down the road. It's going to change every 5 years.
So with what the mayor's saying, and maybe I'll give a case example. We have a neighborhood a couple years back that came in, and we had someone that bought 2 of the homes in the neighborhood because they looked at it from the perspective of, I can buy the house, I can split it in half, build another house, and make money off of it and flip it within a year. And it took that neighborhood and had all half-acre or acre lots and started chopping them up. And we had a bunch of people come in, and they were throwing a fit saying, why are you doing this to our neighborhood? There was no protection. And one of the things that the Planning Commission has discussed, we don't have the best answers, but this was one that we thought could help with changing some zoning and different things like that, was to protect the integrity of the neighborhoods. And so that's one of the things that
I agree with that wholeheartedly. Sherry and I just had an experience where we met with some neighborhoods in the area just north of Butterfield Park across the creek there, right? In some areas that it's been long preserved as these 5-acre parcels, horse property, soft-shouldered roads. It's this really cool piece of Harriman that I think the people who move there love that historical, they want to preserve that. And they fought really hard for it with us when somebody came with a proposal to subdivide into 5 1-acre lots. And so I completely get that, understand. But if we're talking about I guess the question would be, are the land use plans that we're suggesting or that are being proposed here, do they match up with our desires for those neighborhoods? Are they really indicating the areas that we want to preserve a certain way, or areas that we really would love to change? And so, yeah, we're going to call this commercial because we don't want all these high density houses here. We'd love to see them change into something else, right? So some is wishful thinking and some is preservation. And these are all points of potential conflict with our residents that are going to cause them consternation because they don't understand this.
Yeah.
I'm frustrated as a member of the council because I don't understand it, and I'm not sure how to communicate it well with the information that's in this plan as it exists right now. So I'm asking for some of these alternative or clarifying maps or clarifying descriptions that make it easier for our residents to understand what is actually happening.
Good comment.
And there's still going to be changes that come from the city council and recommendations that will change the general plan in certain areas that we've missed, that we're unaware of how they're laid out or what's coming or different things like that happened. And so that's still going to occur, and that's why this process has been so enduring. And so we'll figure out, but yeah, that's why these meetings are important, I think, Steve, because there are, exactly as you said, something probably is on that map that doesn't make sense, that was missed, and it needs to be adjusted. And that's why there's been so many eyeballs on it. So, but good
So
feedback.
Chris, Chris, I just wanted to make one comment about the reason that we took the time to recalibrate this map to show existing built areas that are already developed is so that there's a visual representation of, when we're talking about residential neighborhood 1, and, this is an area that was built that way, and we think it reflects that neighborhood. We want the community to be able to see that on a map and understand, like, okay, that's what residential neighborhood 1 is over here in this development that was built, 5 years ago. That's a visual illustration of what they might be seeing in areas that have not yet developed that have that same category. So So that's the main reason for having that calibration process, is so that Harriman itself, as it continues to grow, that people have a clearer understanding of what to expect for the development pattern that comes with each of the different categories.
Thank you, Susie. Any other discussion on this item?
Hey, Chris, is that, can you hear me?
Yes.
I've been trying to talk for a minute, but apparently I had some muting issues. So, hey, I think I wanted to answer what Steve was bringing up. Steve, what I know what I did when we reviewed this is I wanted to go through and actually compare what the vision was with what we actually got. So, for example, in Rose Creek, when you look at the density, I know we did this a lot as the Planning Commission. We looked at what did we get so you could manage that expectation of what we asked for, or vice versa. So you could actually compare the different subdivisions that we actually got. So the density that you saw, and I'll use Copper Creek, for example. So you knew exactly what the density of Copper Creek was. So that way, if you said, I want 20 more Copper Creek, and that's the density I like, that's what we were trying to get to. And I know we had many meetings with Susie on this, and I know I gave her a lengthy email related to all of those kind of things so that you could actually evaluate.
That's a really,
And that's what we're presenting to you guys.
I think that's a really brilliant idea, and I understand why you advocated for that. I'm not seeing, at least in the format that's being presented so far, that particular idea is being communicated really well. The maps aren't, for those of us who are looking for that, you can see it in the map if you're looking for that particular thing. Oh, wow, they really did what I asked them to do. I'm just not sure that the reason for that is being communicated well to the residents with the formats that we have. That's what I really like to see, is that this plan becomes a tool for education as well as planning for the future.
But remember, this plan is your guys' vision to tell us how you want us to work towards the future. This is the map. This is the vision. Council establishes it, and then we as planning commission try and uphold what you have established as the vision.
Yeah, our two biggest guidelines are zoning and general plan, and then of course ordinance is the third one. So
I think one thing that would be helpful on the map is if you click on the general plan, you click on it, it'll tell you a summary of what that particular general plan item is. Because it is hard when you look at all the different colors and you're trying to differentiate, okay, what shade is this particular piece? Is this residential one? Is this rural? Just if there's some kind of way to simplify it, like I can get down to my little area and click on each, I don't know if you can get down to each parcel. I know you can sometimes through GIS, but I think that would be helpful to see, okay, this is my zoning, this is the general plan overlay. Because for me, like when I bought my home 4 years ago, like I looked at the zoning because I knew stuff about real estate before to make sure, okay, everything around me is pretty stable long term. But for someone else, that can be difficult. They're not usually going to go do that or know how to effectively. That'd be my suggestion, is if you can click either the different zones and it gives you a summary, that I think that brings clarity.
And one of the things that we've talked to and trying to figure out the best way to sort of share this with the community is, what are the size of these houses that are going in this area? And it's, oh, okay, these are going to be quarter-acre lots. Because right now, when you look at the zoning, it's like, oh, they're going to be quarter-acre lots, and then everything is on a tenth of an acre, and they have a ravine that goes through it. And people just don't understand how that happens. And so we had some conversations with Susie on how do we best express that to the community and not have it where, awesome, everything was just clustered in this corner, and we have 10 units per acre. And so those were other things that the city council can also work on with them on the general plan on how best to do that. So.
I think that going back and working on the names on all of the zones might be a little bit helpful. One of the things that we rely on is the fact that currently 8.25 means 2.5 acres, right? Or 0.25 acres, you know, and 8.5 is a half acre. You know, neighborhood 1 versus neighborhood 2 means nothing to anyone who who can't go back and look at the zone, or so that it really needs to be that the name of the zone needs to be very descriptive, particularly in regards to the density of that zone. And so as we're looking to make some updates and changes, you know, as we're reviewing this, that would be something that I would like to see quite a bit of work done on.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, start on my comment, we just said, that's just, I'm looking at this through the lens of the resident, right? Okay, I got involved. Come into a meeting and look at it and I'm trying to figure it out. If I can't, I mean, this is overwhelming to me, I've been involved. For a resident that doesn't know anything about this,
We're lost in the first 5
Yeah.
minutes.
Yep.
it's gotta be way more simplified. It needs to be more descriptive. It shouldn't have to scroll down to a document to find out what neighborhood 1 means. You know?
Yes, and,
The confusion. What said.
amen.
And I think most of us walked in like that, saying, "Oh, it's 1 unit per acre, so we're gonna get 1 unit per." Why is it all quarter acre and lower? And because this is open area and it's 1 unit per all these acres.
So it's gonna be,
I think you're good. Good green light. Yeah.
It's gonna be our turn, I guess, to get into weeds on this thing. What I wanna know from planning commission is what you think we should know, what's the process that you went through, what are the differences that you guys work on? Like, that's what we need.
Yeah, Adam's comments really help. Yeah.
Yes, please. So that's what we're gonna take. Hours and hours and hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to know from you guys what
So through this process, it came to us and we're like, okay, we need it broken down so we understand these areas. We understand what is here, what's already been approved, what areas still are going to be changed, and we have some influence on. And then we talked a lot about figuring out how do we get it to where the public knows, just like you said, that if it's 8.25, the lowest size is 0.25 acres, and it hasn't been occurring like that. And we've been talking about that through the process as well. But we went through the maps with Susie on different areas, what it means in the different areas. And some of the areas, when you looked at the map, we were confused by what it meant, and then asked questions, said, okay, we're okay with that. And so it's really a multi-step where she presents a lot of the material to us. We ask a ton of questions. She comes back. Now we have to address certain areas. Then we had individual 101 or 2-on-1 where Susie helped out with breaking down certain areas that we had concerns with and what was going on there, what was previously there, what's proposed there, what MDAs already allow there or is coming. Because for us, from a planning commission, when an MDA is in place, that's a contract. They're going to get that there. And so now if the city council can change that, go for it. That's up to you guys. We don't have any say on that. So, and that's what I thought. But
I agree with both parties.
Yep. And so, but it's been a multi-step with that process. And we got initial feedback with all the surveys of the community and what they want. And it was a lot of what we expected. We want parks, we want outdoor trails, we want a pool was mentioned multiple times, outdoor pool, different things like that kept being mentioned. And that can be addressed with you on the feedback from the initial surveys, which you may or may not have seen. I don't know what you guys have and have not seen. And so it's really, here's what we have, here's what area we can actually change the zoning to influence in the future. Here's what areas need to be in line with stuff that's already been approved. And here's areas that need to be aligned with what is there that is not aligned with the general plan right now. And so that was sort of the process we went through. And I hate to say a lot of it was just dang understanding the education of where we're at with everything. There was so much information. And I'll let the rest of the planning commission share too, but that was some of what I felt like we experienced going through it. And then it was giving feedback on, we don't think that's a zone that makes sense in that area. And then there was questions of how do you, well, this is commercial, but should we make it more of a tech or light industrial type? Is that a better fit for that area? And questions like that were asked as well of what our opinions were on certain areas.
Jared, and I apologize for interrupting. Maybe if I ask, make sure I understood your question or your request correctly, sounded to me like what would be helpful for the council is once the commission has made their recommendation and their motion on the draft plan, if we formulate a list of kind of objectives and specific recommendations that you believe we're trying to achieve as a city, if we can put together that list of information so that the council can clearly see what it is that the commission is proposing. Is that more like what you were asking for?
In the end, yes,
Yeah,
I think so, right? Here's what we're suggesting be changed.
right.
Right, that's ultimately what
Right.
we're gonna need to know, and we are then tasked with making a decision ourselves. And so as much as we can do that tonight, great, but in the end, that's what's gonna need for tonight. Yeah, what process did you go through? What are the things you want us to know that you considered, that you want us to consider as we're basically gonna start over where you started, right?
Yeah, so obviously it's still a work in progress, and I think we'll work with the commission to formalize what it is that they're trying to achieve with this general plan amendment. And I think at the time of your recommendation, that might be the time to put together a good list and communicate that to the council.
Yeah, because I mean, at least for me, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but how I envision this happening, right? Let's say it's decision day, and we'll have read through everything, and we've looked at surveys and been a part of a ton. And Michael's hoping I don't say anything too negative about the surveys and the questions asked. But we're going to end up looking at the map, and I'll tell you what my main concern is what we can do, right? The areas that are to be planned for, because when I look at that map, most of the area, like Steve was saying, is it's already been entitled. There's very few pockets where there's an opportunity to change something for real, right? So personally, I'm concerned with the areas that we can actually plan for, and for all intents and purposes, there's only two spots, and they're either on the outskirts of town or they're potential annexation areas. Yeah. Right? Like when I get a survey in my neighborhood and it says, do you want neighborhood parks? Sure, but are you going to buy houses and tear them down to put a park in? That doesn't make any sense, right? It's those new areas to be built, and that's kind of the frustration. So when we look at that map and residents look at it and they see empty spaces, they think there's something that we can do about that. Well, if there's zoning and entitlements, and especially MDAs, there's really nothing we can do about that unless we get the property owners to agree to do something, which is rare, right? As far as
And even when we think they've agreed, we find out a couple years later that they have a different plan.
So,
And my only
for me, like
recommendation here-
we spend so much time on all of this stuff. We're going to rely a lot on you guys for a lot of the detail stuff for us. And so that's why we'll need that list.
Yeah.
And then the big thing for us is going to be those areas that we can actually plan the future
Yeah.
for. The stuff that's already done is great. All the worrying and goals and whatever. You guys have done a fantastic job there. We're not going to necessarily get into the weeds on all of that. So we need to know what you've gone through, what you're suggesting,
Okay.
why.
So,
We can say, great, that makes sense. And then as we make the next decision, here's how we can take those things.
So then if I break it down in three, or just three areas that I would recommend a big focus is, it's one, obviously the area that isn't, got an MDA, anything, the area that we can zone however we want at this point, if you want to word it that way.
Kind of a
Two,
blank slate.
yep. Two, the commercial doesn't make more sense for it to be more light industry, light industrial,
Like
more of a
flex
tech type, more of a clean
space?
commercial, more of a retail? Are we going away from big box stores? Deciding what that's going to be. And then those that do have master development agreements and have other things in place like that, focusing on the input from the community for what type of parks are going to be put in those areas. And if I were to say three things, those would be the three things I feel like we could have the most influence on.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Is that good?
Yeah, I like that.
I'd like to just make one last statement here before we move on, because I feel like we're coming to an end on our discussion today. I want to make sure that all the planning commission and our consultant understand that I think that you guys have done a fantastic job so far. This plan already looks better than our last one, as it always should. And I'm looking forward to seeing the way that it works out. I think that there's things that we need to change to make it more usable. But at the same time, I think that it's going to help us as a body work with, and you as a body, work with our developers and get what we're looking for in those areas, as opposed to, well, you say I can do this, so I'm going for the max, and all the issues you guys have been fighting against for years now. So I want to make sure it's clear that this is fantastic and we are absolutely on the right path. I don't want you to think that me, or I assume any member of the council, disagrees with that. You guys done a great job. We still got a long way to go, but we appreciate that you guys are going through it, because it makes our job a lot more easy when it actually makes it to us.
As I tried to say, please don't read into any frustration or anything that from us as far
We felt it the whole time.
Right.
So.
You guys have had the same.
As we've gone through the process.
You guys have had the same frustration with the process, and that's really it.
Yeah.
Like I said several times, you guys have done a fantastic job, and we need to have context for what's coming to us and what you really consider is where I'm going.
Yeah, and if I were to say a fourth thing, it's how to preserve the integrity of neighborhoods, and how best to do that by a change of zone or of what needs to be done, because I don't think individuals that have horses out back are hoping that their neighbor builds 2 more houses behind their house. And so it's just keeping the integrity of some of this. Time is going to change these zones, but preserving them for what they are now, I think, is something that needs to be looked at. So, yeah, exactly.
Well, and I would say, I felt some of your frustration. It looks very different. It's not just the A1. It's not typical A1, A5 on this map, right? Our thoughts behind this were, like we talked, it's been so manipulated over the years, I guess, by some of our partners, I guess. We were trying to really hone in and say, this is more specifically is what we want to say. So no, it does look different, and it will look different. It's going to be an education for the residents. Like I said, that's why I got involved in this. This would have helped me a lot more understand, a difference between a mixed use area and this, we tried to be more specific about what truly could be, not just C2, not just very much what we,
I have a comment. I think I totally agree with looking at the names of this, I guess, legend. But I guess 2 things I would ask is, one, making the legend link to these pages where it says neighborhood residential 1, right? So if I'm looking at it, I can click there and I can go to the details, or on the map itself, if it's GIS, to have a link back to these more detailed pages, so that I get more out of it as a resident.
So for me, we put in a lot of time into this so far. And I think that there's been,
Oh, you got it. Okay, I didn't see it, sorry.
and we've had so much discussion on different areas. I think each of us have our own special areas that we really honed in on and focused on. And I think that we're going to have open dialogue with you guys, and I hope you can all feel free to email the commission if you have questions on a specific area, like why in the world did you put this here? Feel free to let us know if you guys have questions, because I think that there's going to be a lot of questions that you guys have just as we did. And it's funny that a lot of the stuff that you're bringing up has come up. So a lot of the stuff that you guys have discussed is
So I said, and Steve just said it kind of in passing, that the handoff needs to be clean.
right.
Yeah.
And that's why I said we're going to be, at least I feel like we're starting over where you guys were. We need that
Yeah.
that context for us
Yeah.
to start at higher.
I don't want to reinvent the wheel.
And I think, I would love to have you guys invite us to some of your work meetings. When you're bringing this up, we can all take turns. I'd be happy to come to a work
Yeah.
meeting and sit in
That's
here.
what I just wrote down.
We could kind of
It would be good to
rotate
have
through it. and I'm happy to come. Heather will come along.
I love it, right?
And I think because I've struggled too with the residential perspective because I remember when I started this and even now sometimes I look at stuff and say, what are they trying to tell me here? And I think at least from a simple perspective, if you almost had, this is blacked out, meaning this is built, this is the area that we're really making a change in. Here are the areas that are being built that already have stuff approved. And here's the commercial and what kind of commercial would we like to see? Because I think it is worth getting their opinions on what kind they would like to see in the city. Now, it's a lot more difficult to get it here, but at least to have some direction on where to go to where it's almost like, here's 1, 2, 3. There's 3 different things it's showing. And then if you need to break down to the full extent, but we have to simplify it. I mean, it has to be simplified. It's confusing. All right. Do we want to talk about this once more? Can we move on to item 1.3? All right. Item 1.3, discussion of the city. Oh, thank you, Susie.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate all of the discussion. This has been great feedback and just look forward to moving to the next step with y'all. So thanks and enjoy the rest of your meeting.
All right. Thank you, Susie. 1.3, which is a discussion of the city code enforcement approach and process. And it'll be Michael Malloy directing that.
Thank you. We'll bring up the PowerPoint. Sheldon, our former code enforcement officer, is going to come up and be part of this presentation. And as you saw in your packet, we wanted to also introduce our new full-time code enforcement officer, Rocky Crisp. He goes by Rocky, and we were able to recruit him. His last position was with Midvale City as a code enforcement officer, and his wife was on staff with the city. So we really owe your wife big time for helping bringing you on board. Do I have control of this PowerPoint, Jonathan? John? Okay. Maybe. Yeah, if you could just advance it. Okay. So as you can see, we have a new code enforcement officer who has 30 years of experience and has spent time in actual law enforcement, I think primarily in California, and then has worked for various communities, both here in Salt Lake County and in Utah County. So we're really excited to have his level of experience here with the city. And you've been with us not even 2 months yet. I think it's been like 5 weeks. Yeah. Advance to that next slide for us. So this is a review, I'm sure, for many of us, but just kind of as a refresher, covering what are the purposes for code enforcement. To protect the health and safety of the public. We're preserving appearance and character of our neighborhoods. We're trying to foster community pride, encouraging our property owners to maintain their properties and ultimately also protect our property values. So these are some of the common things that we're engaged in through code enforcement process. Oftentimes we're dealing with encroachment on city property with all of the open space and the trails, and we've built a terrific network of city-owned property, but oftentimes those edges are not as defined, and sometimes there's property owners are unsure of where their property begins and ends, and we deal with various encroachments on city property. Weeds and grass violations, of course, are the most common throughout the summer. Road and sidewalk obstructions, junk, parking. We have been able to make some improvements with that with our own police department. But as you know, we are working on some additional tools that we believe will make a big impact using some civil enforcement tools in the coming year, assuming that the council makes a change in our city code. Dumping on city property, landscaping violations, sign ordinance, and that's primarily the temporary signs that we see that happens in the city, and then just general zoning violations. Next slide. We'll just go through these quickly, just some examples of before and after, some things that we've worked on in the past. I think this is a series of slides that you've seen once before. Next. Parking obstructions. As the council and the commission knows, we have worked to lengthen our driveways, but there are a number of neighborhoods that have been developed with some shorter driveways in the past, and oftentimes do have some problems. And at times, even with longer driveways, people will still have block the sidewalk, and we often will get complaints and things of that nature on that. Junk is a really common one, especially in some of our older communities where, maybe historically we haven't had a community that's been as sensitive to just accumulation of materials and being stored in your outdoor neighborhoods. But as we continue to grow and develop, that becomes more of a concern in our community. Obviously, we're always trying to strike a balance with agricultural uses in the city. Next slide. Yeah. Off-street parking, as I mentioned, is common. We are working on also making some adjustments to RV parking, off-street RV parking, trying to clarify our ordinances to make it easier to do enforcement. Dumping, we've talked about. Next slide. Making some improvements to working with our development partners to make some improvements on landscaping. And the city as well, as the council knows, we've done our own projects as far as improving some right-of-ways. Next. Temporary signs. Next slide. And zoning violations. One of the more common ones that we receive are illegal apartments. We do allow some accessory apartments in the city in agricultural zones, but we get a number of complaints in our residential zones where that's not presently allowed. People who are running businesses out of their home that are not licensed, or maybe they're not running them in a manner that is consistent with our home occupation regulations, and then just general zoning violations. Next. Okay, I'm going to turn over some of the process slides and some of the data slides to Sheldon to talk about.
Do you want to give it a shot, Rocky?
This is more of a presentation of what we've done in the past. So
Right. So I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with this process. We worked on this at the beginning of the end of last year. Passed an ordinance to, we'll do a text amendment to actually help with this process. And this is our typical enforcement procedures when we approach violations or receive complaints. Typically, we'll do the door hanger, and that's a courtesy from the city. It's not in our ordinance, or for us, we're not even required to do so. We just do that, as a courtesy to the homeowner, to give them that option to, to become compliant voluntarily. The next step would be a courtesy notice. That's if they don't comply with our door hanger or the initial contact. Notice of violation, the certificate of non-compliance. And if they don't comply at that point, then we turn them over to the ALJ. Next slide. And this kind of breaks down the process. I'll kind of go through it in a little more detail. So if we don't get any compliance after the door hanger or the initial contact's made, we'll issue a courtesy notice to the homeowner. At that point, depending on the violation, we're required by city ordinance to give them at least 10 days to become compliant. Like I said, depending on the violation, we'll adjust that. We'll give them maybe 14 days,
30 days, depending on, what's required to resolve the issue. At that point, if they don't become compliant, then we'll issue a notice of violation. It follows kind of the same procedure where we give them a minimum of 10 days to become compliant. We can adjust that according to the violation or, what's going on. At that point, if they don't become compliant, the city has the option there to actually start, issuing fines and can take legal action at that point, like a civil action. So if they don't become compliant at that point, what we'll do is we'll issue a certificate of noncompliance, and that's just more of a notice for the homeowner, the property owner, the responsible parties, to let them know that they're in violation and and their deadline's expired, become compliant. At that point, they will receive an invoice as well showing, any fines that have accrued at that time, and they'll be noted that they'll be summoned to appear before an administrative law judge. Once that notice is issued, we actually send the case files information to our administrative law judge. They'll issue a notice to the homeowner at that point to appear before them. We'll set a date and they'll come and appear before the administrative law judge where they can plead their case. And at that point, the ALJ can order compliance at that point and issue fines as well. Go ahead. So I don't know if you want to talk about this, Mike, or you want me to go ahead? So I'm just going to quickly go over, some of the difficulties we faced this year with COVID when it comes to code enforcement. We did speak, with staff, with administration, and they asked me to reach out among the other cities and kind of see what their approach was. And the majority of the cities were not. They kind of ceased being proactive with code enforcement. They kind of became a bit more lenient with their residents just to avoid exposing them or, to the virus, et cetera, financial hardships and et cetera. So from that point, we postponed all the ALJ cases. We pushed those off. We weren't going to have people come in and before the ALJ. We issued extension letters to everybody who had notice of violations, letting them know that, during these times, we'll give you an extension, but we ask you to please come compliant during that time. We did extend additional deadlines to people who had courtesy notices out, so they didn't actually move up to notice of violations. Again, like I said, we took more of a reactive approach at that point. We weren't pounding on doors and asking people to become compliant, on minor infractions. Again, with the COVID restrictions, the stay-home restrictions, we became more lenient on street parking because more people were at home. They were juggling cars, kids were coming home from school, etc. So, we just figured it'd be good faith, just to let the people be a little more lenient on street parking. Then kind of a month or so after the COVID lockdowns kind of took place, we started seeing increased complaints for minor infractions where neighbors were calling on neighbors for just minimal things like a piece of wood sitting on the side of their house, or just a tire on the curb, or just minor things, which actually started increasing a lot of our time spending, going out and investigating just tiny infractions, where we couldn't really spend a lot more time on the bigger cases because we were kind of caught up trying to put out these little fires. Because we found like a lot of these cases, I think a lot of it was just the frustration of people being stuck at home all the time. And then again, with the fact that we lost our ability to take people to ALJ and et cetera, we kind of lost that momentum, the consistency we were generating at the beginning of the year, staying on top of violations and et cetera, just, making our presence noticed throughout the community. And unfortunately, we kind of lost some of that momentum. So I'm just going to quickly kind of go over what our caseloads from January 1 to about December. So as of December 8th, I think is what this was at. We've closed 278 cases. We currently have 25 open cases. That's as of December 8th. And overall this year, we've closed 303 cases. And this is just kind of a graph. It kind of just shows you kind of the caseload, the activity, the amount of cases we get per month, and it kind of breaks it down. You kind of notice we kind of come out of winter, we kind of get a little bit, we get a lot of calls for on-street parking kind of, and it kind of settles out once the snow melts. Then we kind of start seeing an increase for weeds. And in that April area, last year we saw a big spike for weeds, then it dropped off again to about that 25, 25, the caseload about 25 cases per month or so. But I guess here the graphic kind of shows that from April, from the COVID, we kind of just continually increased our caseload as we were going throughout the year. You can see up there in August, we're dealing with about 60 cases a month. And then it's, now it's slowly coming back down again. Okay. And this is just kind of what's on the plate at this point. So as of December 8th, we had 5 follow-up inspections to do. We've issued 13 notice of violations and had 7 courtesy notices. And this is a breakdown of the last about 11, 12 months of how the cases break down based on complaint. So yeah, so that would be like proactive, like, yeah, the city themselves, the other departments reaching out to us. It's not complaints against the city. Yeah, sorry. So yeah, last year we were about 68% resident and about 32% proactive. This year we're only about 18%, and that has a lot to do with COVID and kind of some of the restrictions we were trying to mitigate. Obviously, this year 30% of our violations were parking related violations. A lot of that's due to our a lot of people being home, cars parked on the streets. Second up is weed and landscaping. They kind of switched. Last year we had a higher percentage of weed and landscaping. I think it was 32%, and parking was only 18% last year. So
it was too dry for any weeds.
That's about it. What's that?
It was too dry for any weeds to grow.
Yeah. Like I said, these cases don't actually account for like proactive sign and parking enforcement, where we can't issue we can't create a case against a street sign. We can't. There's not a property, because typically it's not the property owners. Well, they're putting on city property, I guess you'd say. So we can't really create a case against nobody. And the same thing with the parking. We can't, if we don't know who owns the car, or if it's where the homeowner is, we can't create a case on it. So that's easily maybe 150, 200 just calls right there, just dealing with that proactive cases.
So just in closing, thank you, Sheldon. It was about a year ago that we were working with the city council in creating or reestablishing our ALJ process. We were very excited about that new tool. We had no idea that we would be dealing with COVID for most of 2020. But in thinking about some of the resources that we have been able to change or bring to the table, quite frankly, having a full-time on-staff city attorney is making a difference and will continue to make a difference. He has the time and the ability and to be able to work with our staff, to work with our code enforcement officer to clarify ordinances and to advise us on what are the right legal processes for us to pursue. So that is a tremendous new resource that we haven't had in the past. Again, we had just initiated the ALJ process and we had only had a few hearings, and it felt like that was going to be a really effective tool for us. But when COVID started and the administration had made a decision, like so many other cities, to really suspend that process, that tool was not effective for us, of course, in 2020 because we just didn't have it. We didn't use it. We still have the administration has given some administrative support outside of our own staff. And then the fact that we have hired such an experienced officer with the city. We're really hopeful that in 2021, we will get back on track, that we will make improvements in our code enforcement process, and that following, next year when we come and do some type of a report to the council and commission, maybe at that time we really reevaluate, what is an appropriate staffing level for the city? Is what we're doing working? Do we have enough tools that are brought to the table? Are we meeting the objectives of the community when it comes to code enforcement? I think at this point in time, I think before we can really answer that, we really need to be able to kind of use all of the tools that we have and see what that will bring, see what that will bear for us. So that's kind of where we're at. Obviously, it's been an unusual year, but we're ready to get going now. We didn't know if any commission or council members were interested in maybe identifying maybe what your priorities are for the coming year in code enforcement, or if you have any particular questions about maybe what Sheldon had shared, our process. So Jackson?
I've got one. So on the enforcement side, how many items have you come across that have been land use type issues or building type issues, or have they all been like parking and weeds type violations? And maybe this is more along the line. I mean, yeah, we've got the apartments, illegal apartments kind of thing, but are there other types of that you've come across?
Yeah, I would say that in general, we have not had, just broad zoning violations in the city.
Other than just, your illegal apartments. That's
Right.
generally what we deal with.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the
RV parking seems to be the bad one. Okay.
Yeah, there's RV parking as well. That's something we're working on as well. We're working on adding some additional language to that ordinance to make it easier for us to enforce that ordinance.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, what are we doing with the pull off the streets? We're not giving them back, are we?
No. Oh, I'll hang on to them for about 30 days. I think that's what Rocky's kind of doing. If someone calls and wants them back, we'll educate them at that point. If not, then they go to the trash.
Are we getting many people requesting them back? Because
No.
I'm assuming they just view it as a cost of business, that their signs are going to disappear.
Yeah, because typically what I'll do is I'll see one, I'll call the number and let them know, hey, I'll give you 2 days to remove these. If they don't remove them, I'll pull them and then I'll
I'm
discard 'em at
wondering
that
if
point.
there's something that we can do to be a little bit more, and I'm kind of turning to our city attorney about maybe, because it's a continual process with the same developers over and over and over again. They're just blatantly ignoring our code. And I'm wondering if there's anything we can do to give that some more teeth so that they stop blatantly ignoring the rules that we have in place for our city. And that may not be a question for now. That may be that's something I'd like to look into for the future.
Sure.
Thank you.
So right now, we can actually, our ordinance allows us to charge $25 per sign to remove them. That's a process an option we can take. We can pull those signs and charge them $25 per sign for removal. That might draw a little bit more attention to them.
I think what I've seen too is a lot of the people that are putting the signs out, they're putting them out when code enforcement is done for the weekend. And then they're going back and picking them up. So they're putting their signs out there for the weekend and then picking them back up is what I've seen, and I'm sure that you too.
I have a question. Do you guys feel like you have
weekends?
enough time to be proactive, or is it more reactive? Because that's kind of, I don't know, that's been my concern for a while, is thinking our city is like 60,000 people. How can they possibly be proactive in like weed mitigation and these other pieces when I'm sure you guys have tons of complaints coming in and that's sufficient to manage? But I know there's a lot of other things that aren't complained about that are violations. In my neighborhood, I can see them. And I don't know, it seems like a lot of people don't want to tattle on their neighbor, but then it's like, hey, they are violating it. It'd be nice if code enforcement just went down the neighborhood and said, okay, that's not right, or is it more you're just waiting to get a complaint?
18% of the time they went down the neighborhood.
That's about right. So what it comes down to is it's just kind of trying to balance your workload. So we all want to be real proactive. The problem is dealing with all, being reactive to all the complaints that come in and trying to be super proactive. And that's what was my initial approach at the beginning when I first came on. What I found myself doing was just burying myself in work where I couldn't stay above my workload. And that's when you come and run into situations where you've opened a case, you can't continually follow up on, people get upset. And these could be cases that you opened yourself, or more than likely it's a case someone called you about that, they're really concerned about. And being that you're trying to, balance your time between all these cases, some cases, kind of get lost in the shuffle, and, it's a tough balance.
And that's kind of what I want to bring up, because I kind of feel like, do we have enough staff for the size of our city? If we really analyzed, if we were proactive and managed the issues that come to you, like what's the appropriate staff? Is it 4 people and we're trying to do it with 1.5? I just want to be realistic there instead of, I know you guys are in a hard position where you're just mostly working stuff that comes to you.
Yeah. There's a couple of parts of that issue that we're a very new city. And so even though we have, one officer basically for, let's say, 60,000 people, that if you look at other cities, we're understaffed. But not every city is dealing with a building stock that is essentially 20 years old. Obviously, as your city ages, you're going to have more issues, more code enforcement related issues relative to property maintenance. So that's something that's kind of unusual as far as skewing those numbers. Another thing is previously, prior to COVID, we were spending a lot of time re-inspecting, re-asking for cooperation, because that was basically the only way we were able to get people to comply with the ordinance, was just simply just keep asking, keep working with them. Nothing ever really moved to some type of a legal process. That's why we created the ALJ. We were hoping that we could reduce the number of times that we are engaging in that, asking or, setting deadlines for compliance, and then not receiving compliance, being able to hand that case off for a legal process. So we haven't really seen what we can do under normal conditions. That's why I'm suggesting I think it would be appropriate to see what 2021 will bring us. Hopefully it'll be a more normal year, because as you can tell, we are re-engaging. We are starting the ALJ process. We had no idea when we decided to suspend our kind of change our enforcement approach. We didn't think it was going to be for all of 2020, right? We were thinking maybe a few months, summertime by sure we'd be done. It just, nothing happened the way anybody thought it would probably happen. So I think we need to see what we can do with the tools that we have right now, and then reevaluate that question. I think that would be fair, because obviously anytime we add another full-time staff person, that's a very costly addition to the city's budget.
I was just gonna follow up, Mike, with the ALJ. We only had like a couple cases go through, 4 or 5 cases go through, and cases that were open for over a year, we saw compliancy within the next 30 days. So, I think that's when people see that judgment or see that order, and they, appear in a legal manner, they take it more serious, as opposed to just, not answering your phone calls or, or putting you off. And like I said, back before the ALJ came around, you're pretty much just, running into walls every time. You just kept, it was like Groundhog Day. You kept doing the same thing, getting the same answers. We could issue
So
fines.
this is Adam. I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Hey, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I do have a question. I agree with Mike that we need to adjust it and keep looking at it, because this is definitely not a normal year. But what areas, since you have so much experience, do you see from a maintenance perspective that you can't enforce based off of our current codes? Like in the past, I know in my neighborhood, I live in an 8.25, and we have a person that parks his semi truck in behind his fence and the practicality doesn't make sense. But when they've come out, they say that they can't do any code enforcement because he's in an A zone. I'm talking about bigger equipment type vehicles that are off the beaten path, but they don't make sense in the residential community. Have you seen any of that, or how have you dealt with that in your past? And you can mute me. That was my only question.
Just large vehicles in agriculture. Adam, this is Mike. So Rocky might chime in here as well. I apologize. I know you were trying to direct your question to our new officer. I know that in my conversations with Rocky, what he has been currently looking at is the need to tighten up some of our regulations to be able to do enforcement of larger vehicles that are being parked on private property, as you mentioned, kind of primarily in our larger kind of agricultural zones. Like one of the issues we have right now is we have limitations on RV parking, but it doesn't really specify a quantity, doesn't really talk about whether or not the RV vehicle has to be owned or licensed or registered to that actual property owner. It doesn't clarify, if you're just doing it as a service for your family or for a friend and not charging, is that okay? So there's a number of things that we need to fix in order to be more effective at doing enforcement. And I think, we've been talking specifically about RVs, but I think that would also apply to these larger vehicles like you were talking about, Adam.
Yeah, because what I'm noticing is a lot of maintenance, diesel mechanics, they don't take it to the shop, you take it to your house. The bigger trucks that pass, that are larger than a typical truck, but they're working on hard equipment, and so I've just noticed that there's a lot of those, and it just beats up the sidewalk and everything in that area.
So I have a question though, but at what point do we tread on personal property rights? I mean, there are some times, like if you have an RV and you want to park it at your house and you have a big enough place to park it off the street, should that not be a right of a personal property owner? And maybe your mom has an RV. No, I understand, but I mean, I just want to
But I
be
can,
clear.
I can see Sherry's point as well. It's their backyard, they're parking their vehicle in.
And it's not on the street,
Yeah.
and it's not over 35 feet, whatever tall the neighboring house could be next to you, right? Which is imposing. So when do we tread on personal property rights? By making more and more and more and more restrictions.
And I agree, and that's why I wanted to ask that question, what they've done in the past, because what I've seen is in some of the older communities, as people have upgraded and moved up, you see the other people that have good jobs, but they involve a little bit heavier equipment. And what I'm noticing is that it's beating up the city infrastructure. And like I said, I've seen a semi-truck tractor trailer parked in the back of someone's yard, which meets the intent. I'm not disagreeing with it.
Right.
But when you park the front end of that diesel truck in your driveway and it rips up your driveway, it deteriorates the community. And that's why I'm glad he's from a different community that's a little older, is because I think we need to take those lessons learned and improve that so we don't head down that road.
Yeah, I don't know. That's always my issue with a lot of all the regulations, is we have to be careful. I believe we live in America and we should have some personal property rights. And I don't think it's the intent of the government to encroach constantly on people's personal property rights, as long as that doesn't extremely negatively affect the next door neighbor. So.
Well, and I don't think Adams even has brought up the neighbor. I think more so of they cracked the driveway that's owned, or the sidewalk that's owned by the city.
Right, but then there would be something in our code that said, hey, you got to fix the sidewalk. You broke the sidewalk.
But that's the question: is there something in our code that takes care of that?
Right.
But that's the issue, is because it's in an A zone, per the old code enforcement person I worked with. Because I live in a current A zone, and this isn't even by my house, so I want to make sure that's clear. it's because we're in that A zone, it doesn't prohibit the larger equipment. So you can park it there, even though it's beyond the ability of the public right of way.
Yeah, Adam, I think you identified one of the common problems is that because we do want to try and preserve and protect our agricultural heritage, we do have certain land use rights that are maybe more generous or more broad in the agricultural zone. But so many of our neighborhoods in the A zones have actually been developed in a more suburban pattern.
Yeah.
They're not really agriculture. They're really an R-type zone.
Right.
But the regulations that are applied to them is an agricultural zone. And so, Adam, that's exactly the problem that we're running into. So our intent is to bring some amendments to give the code enforcement officer potential clarity, like Jared is mentioning, maybe tie it to lot size, but then at the same time, allow the commission and the council to communicate to us as staff is what do we value as a community? Is it property rights? And if that's what we're going to value and we're going to have an ordinance that respects that, that will help us to know what we can enforce and what we can't. So we definitely need to bring more clarity. We're going to have something that you will be able to respond to and give us that direction that we need.
Makes sense.
I think it's appropriate to jump in here too and just reinforce what Michael said. From a statutory perspective, enforcement is easiest if you look at what your goal is, right? He identified in his slides what the goals of code enforcement are. And that changes, I mean, they're very broad, but they can also be narrowed down by zone type, by neighborhood, whatever the council determines in establishing that ordinance. But I think as you do that, it makes your enforcement easier. It also protects those individual property rights that Councilmember Warren brought up. And it makes it a lot easier to enforce on the ALJ side, or whether it be a criminal case in justice court, whatever your mode of enforcement is, it makes it that much easier to I don't want to say stick it to them, but to hold their feet to the fire, because that's what we're trying to do, right? Is to get compliance with our city ordinances.
I can make one comment here too. Is I think that there is a distinction to be made. I don't think it's a binary choice between private property rights or the sidewalk. I think there's some gray area, there's some media area in there to have some discussion and some negotiation there. But I think that we need to be clear that there are things that are personal property rights, and then there are people that are using their personal property in city streets or sidewalks or things like that, right? And there's a crossover between those. I mean, we don't want to tell people you can't park in your own backyard and tell them they can't park on the street too, right?
Yeah.
So there's a difference there. And I think that we want to be clear about that. The other thing I wanted to say is I really appreciate that you guys have a codified enforcement process that escalates, from education about an issue through various steps to where they have an opportunity to comply without consequence many times before it becomes an issue. I really appreciate that that's how we handle it in the city. Our code enforcement, like you said, there's some reasons why we're doing it and what our goals are. And nowhere on there was it, to harass the good tax-paying citizens of Harriman. That's not what this is about. And so I appreciate the process you go through to really act respectfully and responsibly with our residents to see compliance. And I think that's why you have so many closed cases that are successful, and I appreciate that.
Just out of curiosity, how many of these cases per se we receive compliance after the initial contact? Maybe a rough percentage.
Oh, that's good.
That's awesome.
What we're saying is the residents of Harriman, as a general rule, are willing to comply simply by being asked because they're good people. And we appreciate that effort.
And by implication, those that don't comply are bad people? I'm just,
You are putting words in somebody's mouth, which is inappropriate. All of the residents of Harriman are welcomed members of our community. We appreciate their individual aspects and views on code enforcement. I know you are.
Is there anything else
bet,
on the
yeah.
code enforcement? Rocky, did you have something? Well, we hold the mic up because some of the people at home.
I've worked a lot of places. That being said, we're not the only city here in Utah immune to the growth, the explosive growth. The infrastructure hasn't caught up with the growth. Every city is going through growing pains right now, including ourselves. Harriman reminds me of when I worked in Draper back in '09. It was a cow town that became a city overnight. And I dealt with the same thing. The old farmers, oh boy, here comes big government. You know, if I was to go and talk to my dad about code issues, he would say, "Get the heck off my property." My dad's a constitutionalist. My property, I can do what I want. That being said, when I entered code enforcement, I came up here, two quick things. If you're wondering why I left LA Sheriff's Department, is because they mandatory retired me out in '02 due to a lot of injuries I sustained. I became a liability and they mandatory retired me out. Then why I left Midvale, just so you know, is they laid 7 of us off. And that was fine. It's an interesting city with a lot of issues. Again, growing pains. So in Draper, what took place was over time, it took care of itself. Farmers over there, the old timers, they figured out they're sitting on a gold mine, and developers were knocking at their door, beating at their doors. Most of it took care of itself, and they're all subdivisions now. Now, that being said, my parents were farmers in Arizona. So when you go by a lot, you see all the old tractors and all the old equipment and all the broken down vehicles. Those have value. To some people, to my wife, it's junk. But to an old farmer, that has value, right? They might need a part off it someday. So, boy, the way we talk to older people versus the way we talk to a 30-year-old is completely night and day. I really didn't know what code enforcement did when I got into it. And my first job up here was up in Park City. Wow. I was given a phone and I was told, don't do anything until I call you. And that's how that was. It was so political up there. And then I went to Sandy and worked in Sandy. Well, what Sandy was trying to do is stay ahead of the 8 ball. And they wanted to update our codes because it was old Salt Lake County code. And it was written years ago, and it was time for change. So what we did is we had Nick Dirksen, who I believe is still there. He contacted every city in the nation trying to find out who had the best mousetrap. And at that time, it was between Orlando, Florida, and Phoenix, Arizona. And so what we did is the work was already done for us. So we merely adopted their whole entire property maintenance code. And it was a great thing. A lot of people were fearful that we were going to go enforce everything to the letter of the law. And that wasn't the case, but it sure gave us, as the enforcement officer, all the tools to address any given situation we needed to. Downspouts, awnings, peeling paint off structures. It was really a good ordinance at that time. So, my gosh, I have so much to say on this topic. So even at the cities I worked up here, what I do a lot of times, and Mike and I were talking about the RV issues, I'll contact everybody that I know up here, and I know pretty much an officer at every city in Utah County and Davis County and Salt Lake County. And it's interesting because it's all over the map. There is no consistency up here in code enforcement. There are some cities trying to stay ahead of the 8 ball. Lehigh is trying to make sure they don't get homeless in there, and they know all the tech companies are coming, so they're trying to stay ahead of the 8 ball. So code enforcement's under the police department, and they get really good compliance when a gun and badge shows up and tells somebody to take care of an issue. Sandy's trying to be proactive. In my opinion, West Valley has probably the best civil process in place. They went from 6 officers to 14. All right, and they have right now they're down to 12, and they have a population of 120,000. That's how many you hire if you want to make change in your city. Typically, you have 1 code officer per 20,000 residents, and that is to make a difference. If you just want to manage it, then you tear it down. If you want to make a real good faith effort and actually change the dynamics, it's 1 per 20,000 will do that. So a lot of the work has been done. It's, Harriman has a lot of growing pains. I'm up for the challenge, so thank you for hiring me and giving me the shot here. My wife is Lori over in customer service. She loves it here and told me I'll look into coming here and working. I've been here for about 5 weeks. I'm up for the challenge, and there's a lot of challenges here, as I'm finding out. Legal has been wonderful. Chase has been a good asset for legal advice and interpretation. The police department has been wonderful. Marcus behind me, been a good resource for me. The continuity here in the city, merely I talk to old-time employees that know the history of why it's like this. They can give me a lot of insight. So I have my work cut out for me, but we got to change. Progress is come to our front door, and we got to just continue to tweak our codes to make it work for Harriman.
Thank you, Rocky.
Any questions?
So is Sheldon going to continue working in code enforcement?
So he is backup when Rocky's not available, but he's moving full-time into city planning.
Just like, it's pretty interesting. A lot of people don't know. On a simple case, if we only handle 3 or 4 a day, what's interesting is we go out there to see if there's a violation. If there is, we'll leave a door hanger. Then we have to go back out and do a re-inspect, and then if it's still there, we have to do a courtesy notice. Then we go back 10 days after that, if it's still there, we do a notice of violation. Then after that, we go back out there. If it's still there, we forward it, with a letter of non-compliance. So there's a lot of steps there just for one case. There's, it's time consuming, especially if it's possibly a legal non-conforming issue. If it's on the west side and it's been there forever, it's going to take a lot of time to research what's going on there. So just want to give you that one case can tie you up for a long time.
When I was looking at your steps, I kind of wondered if you combine number 1 and 2 together, because it seems like they're one and the same in my mind. When I look at the door hanger or courtesy notice, it's like, why do we have 2 courtesy notices?
The door hangers are for simple fixes. If somebody had a pallet of grass delivered and they left the pallets on the sidewalk, that's a door hanger situation. Something simple is if it's more significant, then we may move to the courtesy notice right off the get-go. But we try to have a diplomatic, professional, low-key approach.
Can you tell us about what happens after it goes to the administrative law judge?
Yeah, Shelby can talk about the ALJ process.
So typically what we see is once it goes to ALJ is the administrative law judge will make a judgment against the property. And what I've seen is we'll typically reduce the fine, because what we can do is we can charge them the $5,000 per violation. So usually by the time they get their summon and actually get a court date, a hearing date, they've already exceeded 30 days and they've already maxed out their fine. So at that point, when they're walking in, they haven't come in compliance at that point. They're walking in and approaching that hearing officer with a $5,000 fine. And at that point, the hearing officer will review their case, and he'll give them a deadline. Say, well, I'll give you 30 or 60 more days. And in addition to that, I'll knock, I'll charge you $250. I'll find you $250 right now. But if you're not in compliance in that 60 days, you'll get that full $5,000 fine, or whatever the maximum fine at that point. So that's typically the case. And Fortunately, the case that went in front of the ALJ, they were resolved within those 30 days. So, we haven't had any revisits back to the ALJ at that point. But I have witnessed some. Well, we went and actually attended some ALJ cases in Taylorsville, where they had repeat offenders, and when they come back in, he'll give an additional 30 days. That's kind of what I saw, but he'll penalize the full fine at that point.
Thank you, Sheldon.
I have something on that too, I'd like to add. What people don't realize is when it goes to the ALJ, some of these fines could be $3,000 to $5,000. People go, holy crud. Well, the ALJ has discretion, all right? And like Sheldon said, is that they'll fine them because they were in violation, found in violation. So there will be a little bit of a fine there. But he can suspend the remaining, fine him $500 and suspend the other $3,000 and put them on a 12-month probationary period. So it's not going to be when people hear, oh my gosh, those fines. In West Valley, for every day you're out of violation, it's $100 a day for a resident. If you're an LLC, it's $500 a day. If you're a corporate owned, it's $1,000 a day. So those fines are outrageous by the time the person gets to court. But what the judge does there is the same thing. He'll impose a fine and suspend the rest on the 12-month probationary period. Now, that being said, Scottsdale, Arizona puts you on a 24-month probationary period. So it depends on the direction you want to take our city and how we move forward on this. But just know when people get fined, they're not going to get zinged. Typically, I've never seen it for the full amount. The ALJ will use discretion on that.
Thank you, Rocky. Thank you, Sheldon.
I have a question for Rocky.
Sure.
So with the exception of involving law enforcement, are there steps we can take to expedite the compliance process much earlier in these steps? Maybe like stronger wording or anything else in your experience that you've used?
That's a great question, but I think I know that this is a great topic that we are all very interested in, but we are going to start running out of time. We've been on this topic for a while, so I'm good with answering the question, but I'd ask that once we're done with this, we get
at this point, let's have any planning commission or city council that have additional questions actually email compliance or code enforcement, sorry, and then we'll be able to get any additional questions answered. Let's move on or go to item 1.4, which is a discussion of the Harriman Town Center commercial property. And thank you, Sheldon and Rocky. Is there a way to turn these mics on to it as well? No?
Go feedback.
Yeah, it just goes to the other ones. We're 6 feet. We're 6 feet.
Am I good? Okay. So we have brought this back. We've talked about this over the years several times, and Councilmember Orrin asked what was going on at the town center. So here we are to discuss our town center. Yes, thank you, Sherry, because we would love some direction from you all. So as you're all probably aware, we own pads around our Crane Park, and they're all ready to go. The infrastructure's in, the parking's in. And we've had several interested businesses over the last, I don't know, 5, 6 years. They come and we get them excited, and then nothing happens and they go away. So we would love some input from you all, and hopefully we can move things forward. Next slide. So, yes. Yeah, we haven't got a consensus from council on. Yeah, we hear differing points of view. So So as you can see here, these are the commercial pads. The small pads around the park are the city-owned pads, and then the other larger parks.
Can we please make sure that we have our microphones on mute?
Developer owned. Next slide, John. And it's just zoomed in further so you can see the square footage of those slides. Next slide. So Mike worked with one of his architectural firms on coming up with some massing so you could see what a two-story building could look like on these lots. Don't really pay attention to the front ones where our public safety building's going to go. But that just shows that with these two-story buildings, you could still have good view in and out of the park. And we can also get some more drawings done, right?
Yes.
That should be helpful as we move forward. Next slide. So options, just think about this while we finish the presentation. I'm going to the mic in just a minute. But some of the options we have are the city can own the buildings and lease them. If we do that, that gives the city more control over uses, vision, what the look and feel is. We can also sell the property to the end user, sell off.
Hey, John, can you mute?
So we have somebody needs to mute their phone or their computer. It's making it difficult for all of us to hear.
Adam, mute your computer.
Okay, we're gonna make you feel bad, Adam. It's all your fault.
He just popped off. He's not even there.
Sorry, Heather.
That's okay.
It's like hard to hear you.
Okay, so, or we could sell the property to an end user, like a salon or a coffee shop or something they could develop. Or we could work with a development partner and they could build and lease the buildings. So those are just a few options discussed internally. So think about those options while just discuss more look at the town center.
So I guess my question is as these commercial entities come to the city, what have they shown the most interest in? Owning it, leasing it?
They haven't prepared. They just say,
They
you
just
know,
want
we want, when are you gonna, well, I shouldn't say that. When are you gonna have a building there?
Yeah.
I don't think
okay.
they want to build the building. They're just business owners. They don't typically
So
want,
they want to lease.
you know, they just, what's your time frame on the buildings? And
So when we initially, when this all first started, was before my time, what was the vision then? What was the intent of the city owning the property? What was the vision? That we would be the developers?
so I don't remember who was, I don't know if anyone's in here that can speak of that, Wendy or Tammy, but the vision of the look and feel we had, but I don't remember the discussion on, were we just going to partner with a developer to build the buildings? That's kind of what I remember.
Look from backward.
There was no consensus on whether partnership or whether development something that was throughout the conversations over the years, there's never been a consensus on exactly what we're going to do. So I think that's kind of what we're looking for is how would you like us to proceed?
Yeah.
Because we do have a lot of interest, but without a building there, a lot of these smaller boutiques, they just don't have the means to build something on their own.
Right. I mean, I like your perceived full speed ahead would be my answer to that, because I think that it's such a distraction to what's been created here, just to have all this vacant stuff around here, and not to mention commercial things that should be coming in, or boutique things, you know, things that were part of the vision when this was created, so that you're at the ice skating thing, then maybe you can hop over and get a hot chocolate, whatever. You know, that I think it needs to be done. I don't know that cities typically would be in a position to be developers. I mean, is it normal for cities to want to offer developers? Or how do you guys feel about that? I don't think cities, I don't think it's our expertise.
I want to, frankly, I want to know what staff wants us to do. What's the recommendation from staff on these projects? Is it your recommendation that we build it, lease it ourselves? Is it your recommendation we do nothing? What's your recommendation?
Never do nothing.
I.e.
No,
let
it
them
is
do
not, it's
themselves?
not typical that a city would build buildings, but it does happen. We already have an RDA created. You would need an RDA to do that, I believe. I'm looking at Chase. But
And Heather, I'm trying to remember these buildings. Are these the ones that are pretty much retail, commercial type on the bottom and then have the offices on top, or
whatever we want.
whatever we
Yeah.
want? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, because I know we've had a couple for.
So if I may,
Mhm.
I've made this comment about this area several times. I don't think any of the decision makers here were around when the decision for this was made.
Yeah.
For me, as a professional who analyzes businesses and whether they are worth investing in, this is a terrible location, right? This conversation kind of reminds me, anybody watch the show Gold Rush? Anybody dumb like me and watches that and expects something different
it.
every week? And every time they go out and they say it's make or break this time, and and they keep doing things the same way and expecting different results. Anyway, this part reminds me of them saying, well, we want to go over here because we think there's gold there. Well, why don't you do some systematic testing and find out if it's viable to get anything out of the ground there before you stake a claim and put all the time and effort and money into it and go broke. What needs to be done here is on our part, if we really want this to develop, we need to do that testing. We need to get a partner and say, is this a viable location? Is there enough traffic through here that any business could survive? The first conversations that I was privy to about this was as a resident, leading a resident group and coming to council meetings as they were getting ready to build all this stuff, and they were so happy about their new city hall and park and the commercial that's going to be there. And I just looked down and went, that's a terrible location. Like what businesses do you think are going to be there? And it was coffee shop and ice cream shop. Oh, it would be so great. You can go to the park and you can go get a hot chocolate. Well, I'll tell you what, to run a business, I mean, what does it cost to rent a square foot of space, right? And pay the taxes and pay the utilities and pay all of the overhead. How many cups of hot chocolate is it going to take to pay for that space for just one week, let alone a month or a year? That's why you see those places come and go like nothing, right? None of them are ever going to have money to build a space. So then you have to go the next level up. Who does have the money? Who builds those buildings and rents them out? They will know whether it's viable or not. They've done the research. They know what it takes to do it. And if the answer comes back that yes, it's viable if you do it this way, then let's have that conversation. But if they come back and say, it's just not there and it won't be there until you reach this level of traffic through that area, whether that's through finishing the development in the area, which is just about done, right? Or you transform some of this other area to where there's consistent events there that bring people to that area. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I actually would say there should be kind of two other options. One is do nothing and sit on the land, right? You can always sell land later if it's going to be valuable, but we need to find out if it's valuable. Or should we just turn those into ball fields or turn a few of them into ball fields and maybe have one spot that's actually viable commercially? But at least as far as I know, every conversation we've had about this, the testing, that work has not been done to find out if it's even a viable location.
Yeah, so I agree with that. So first of all, how do we get the testing done? And second of all, I think that if we're not gonna do anything with them, we should at least turn them into something rather than leave them.
But grass
at
dam
their-
can always build something
Yeah,
later.
exactly.
Market or something.
Something that
So
we utilize.
I've got a question on this. Long-term growth for the city, how much space are we going to need office-wise? I mean, I know that we're already busted at the seams here. We don't have room for our police department. We don't have room for, our fire crew. We're looking at building a public works building. We're looking at building a public safety building. There's all sorts of needs that we're going to have. Are we going to need more office space? Is this something that would be better suited for,
When you say
government
office,
complex?
those were all government. Are you talking office like,
No, I'm talking
Any
about,
office?
government office space for the city.
okay.
I mean, is that, is that something we're gonna need? And if we build, I mean, I envision something of say, in this area, if we need more government office space for the city, why wouldn't we put it on the land that's right next door that's gonna make it easy for the city to run? And two, is there a possibility of making a side entrance that the city employees come in and out of, and then putting some retail space in the bottom, so for use in, for the park and things like that? Elsewhere, that's what I see. I kind of, in a lot of ways, agree with Jared. I don't see who's going to come anytime soon for that space. And are we shooting ourselves in the foot when we say, gosh, man, 30 years from now, we are really going to need that space for more functions, because we're going to be double the size what we are now, and we already don't have enough space. And now we're going to have to go out and look and try to find somewhere when we had these 4, lots of land that would have been perfect for government, for government campus. So for me, that's where I see. Do I see there being an opportunity to maybe share some retail space within that, where we're on the top floors and they're underneath, and then we never cross? Sure, I see some benefit to that, but I have a hard time saying that anytime soon we're going to see anything more than a coffee shop say, hey, and then I'm concerned that they're not even going to have a real opportunity to be successful, unless we pay for the building.
I want to go along with what's been said too, because I mean, we have a pretty good market study, because with Edge Homes doing all the development around it, we are pushing for more commercial, and they're looking at us saying, no, we don't need more. What we're giving you on both sides of the U shape is what we feel is viable, right? So I think that's.
Well,
go
I
there.
mean, with
I
that
think-
being said, Brody,
Yeah.
we also, they came back and said, we do think, I think it's 32 units for
Yeah,
live work
work,
units are
live.
viable,
Yeah.
because there's been more and more interest as we started asking.
The interest in the live work units is really high.
And so that's really high. And now I agree. The question is are these viable for commercial? But I think the better question is, what is this area being envisioned as? Is
Yeah.
it every weekend we have different events going on at that park and we have 1,000, 2,000 people showing up? Is it the ice skating is going to grow from here? I mean, what is this being envisioned as? Because the more people you bring to an area, the more viable it becomes.
Well, that's
And
kind of
with the amount of housing still yet to come, with the townhomes and everything else that's going in there, you're talking about a good amount of people right here. And as far as I've heard from some of these business owners that I've talked to, Harriman's been pretty successful with some of the stuff that they've located. And now I don't know if this is viable or not, because I've not done the research, but I feel like we're guessing right now without knowing on either side.
Yeah.
And that's what's coming out of everyone's mouth in here right now.
Well,
is
I
we're
think you make-
guessing
I-
it's
I
not
think-
viable.
I think you
And
make a
that's
good
what
point.
bothers me. Yeah.
Do the analysis.
Yeah, we need to do it because I know for a fact that one of the hair salon places that's located up the hill, up in Rosecrest area, has done so well. They want to expand, but they haven't found a good location.
Yeah. Well,
And
I mean,
so-
I'm kind of going with what the mayor's saying is, I kind of feel like we should make it flexible, If right now, in the next 10 years, we're going to use it for open market during the summertime and it's grass, I'm good with that. I guess with market analysis, it's going to tell us what it should be today, but that doesn't mean, what do we want it to be in 30 years? That's why I think the market analysis is good, and taking into the city's needs long term, because this is a great location for future government buildings if we need more.
Well, and that's what a market analysis will tell you, is these are the types of businesses that could survive there.
Yeah.
Right. And the capital it would take to build the types of buildings to support them. Because you can build we can go through and do CCNRs and say, this is what we want everything to look and feel like. But the cost of building that does not match the use. I
Correct.
mean, a hair salon and a candy store, they're just not going to be able to pay the rent that goes with it. So that's what we need, that market analysis done. Is it viable? Is there gold in the ground to get out? Right. For one, if there is, great, let's go for it. If it's not, then what are the other scenarios that that market analysis can give us. What does it look like if we leave it as is? It's civic and residential use, right? Then what realistically can survive there, if anything? Second scenario is what if we have consistent events there, right? So who could survive there if there's a certain draw every weekend plus whatever the trickle is during the week? And then what if there's a combination, right? They'll go through those different scenarios and say, here's what would have to happen in order for these kinds of businesses to be viable in that location, because it's not, in my opinion, this whole area is backwards of what it should be, right? If you wanted to have commercial viable next to City Hall, this should be flipped around, and the commercial land over on 134th with City Hall and the park behind, right? Trying to push it over to this side away from all the commercial and the major transportation routes. There's just nobody that comes by here consistently enough, right, to say, I'm going to go shop in that little spot that's tucked in behind City Hall by the park, right? So at least to me, we need that analysis that can tell us, is it worth spending more time, or are we spinning our wheels? And should we look at other uses?
Yeah, there's no way we can even set a CCNR, or you might drive out every potential that could have came in because you set your CCNRs opposite of what the market analysis would show.
Will you go through a few of these slides while I just make a few comments? So we have talked to, your typical chain places, and they said, no way. That area, we would never come there. There's not enough traffic. So we are aware that you aren't going to get those. Another thing to consider is studies are great, and we can do a study and it will tell you market feasibility for certain uses, but also what do we want this to be? What do we want it to look like? Because you don't have to build a building that's 60% brick and stone and price people out. There are other options, and you can create events to create a draw. People will go out of their way to a place if they know about it and there's buzz about something. You see that a lot. So I agree, it's not an ideal location. We would never get businesses that are on 134 to come and locate back here, but it's all about what we want it to be, what we want it to look like.
And that's part of what I'm saying, is that market analysis would tell you, if you want it to be X, this is what needs.
But what do we
happen for
want
the
it to
support.
be? I guess
Have you
is
guys
still
ever
the
been to the
question.
salt mine? It's one of the, are you familiar with it? The salt mine? So
No idea
it's
what
in Draper. It's in Draper, and it's like a WeWork location. It's not WeWork, but it's called the Salt Mine. It's located up on the hill all by itself, and it's busy. And they have events where people come in from all over the Salt Lake County to speak on different business stuff. They have people that are there every day in their little cubbies and everything else. I think it's a good example of something that is very viable in an area like this, because there's a lot of people that prefer not to work from home, but have the option to work from home, and wouldn't mind paying $100 a month to go sit in a little cubicle and then have a little coffee shop inside those WeWork areas. And
Well, that's kind of what I think both Heather and I are saying is.
as she mentioned it,
What
yeah,
is it that you want it to be, right? And pick your scenario.
yeah.
And then do the analysis. What do you need to have to support it? Because that's a good example of something being busy that's out of the way. But what are the numbers? Like, how does it work? Is it truly viable? Who's going to front the money to build that thing, right? And assume that it's going to work in that location. So we just need to, I guess maybe and correct me if I'm wrong here, Heather, but what you guys are asking for is, what are those options that you guys want us to look at, right?
Well, and if you're saying we don't want to look at those options because we need to know what's viable first, then forget my slide. But also, still let us know what your vision is for the area, because I think that's the most important thing. If you guys don't care if it's, what it looks like really, but if it's sustainable, whatever it's going to be, it will work there and it'll generate traffic or revenue, because those are kind of two different things, in my opinion. I want to know what you guys want it to be, I guess, first.
Yeah.
I don't want to waste time daydreaming about it. I want to know what actually.
And you are very black and white, and that's how
Right.
your brain works, and that's great. But does anybody else have any, because we can just go do a study and come back with, this is what's viable, and if it's.
I look at it as a user experience. I mean, you talk about the park and people coming here for ice skating and for concerts, for everything else, that they come here for a purpose. And if you were to look at something around this area, I would think it would be for the same thing. A guitar shop that teaches guitar lessons, a piano shop that teaches piano lessons, a hair salon for the mom to go next door because she doesn't want to drive back home while she waits. Different things like that that are more of, okay, this is an experience when we come here versus, oh yeah, there's a nail salon and then there's a gun shop and there's everything else. And it's, I mean, to be perfectly honest, we drive out of the city for most of our stuff. We just do. There's nothing here. And we have a huge community that has discretionary income that goes and spends it somewhere else. And so for us to say, we don't know if it's viable, it's not viable. It's not that it's not viable. It's we need to put the right thing there to make it viable. And that's where my thought goes. And it's really, I mean,
If you want to put a building there, talk to people who build those buildings and rent them out. They'll tell you if it'll work.
Would you guys be okay with different designs? Like there's these.
I think
there's
it's a
container
must.
parks, There's different things. It's more of a temporary, but you know, it could kind of be like a startup for a company to see what's the draw. Are people going to come and not dump all the money into the building and then you have this building? I mean, is that something you
Well,
guys would even be?
Yeah, I like the container stores. I went to one in California. Had like 7 or 8 restaurants all clustered together in a container park, so to speak. The thing I like about that is I think it gives the city time and flexibility. If they, in 15 years, say, hey, we want to build a government building on it, it's not, I'm tearing down this $20 million building to put something that they want to put there at that time.
I'm open to anything. I mean, if you want to do tents there during the summer for,
Yeah.
fairs and things on the weekends, and just have to, it's just getting people used to going there for something.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I can't speak for anybody else, but I'm open to anything that can make good use of it, but leaves the opportunity later. But to ask those questions, do you want to, does the city want to build a building there? No, and if we did, these are all the things that we have to know, right? Have to approach it like a business. But I think we have to look at alternative uses or different ways to do it. And I think maybe that when somebody asks what the vision was of it, that's the only thing I think in these conversations that's been considered so far is building a building that looks nice,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's what the context of the conversation's always been is we're going to have stores there and it's going to be a building. We need to make sure it looks nice. I think we have to consider like just scrap that idea and say we need to consider anything to make use of this space
Mm-hmm.
until the solution presents itself, or we want to put the money behind doing some real market analysis and nail something down.
Yeah, I agree. There's some great, Starbucks puts them up all the time, right? Those container buildings or something, or just some tilt up kind of smaller ones or things like that are way less expensive. But I think that it is a good idea to maintain ownership of the property in case at some point, but we can do leases where you own the building, but you don't own the land, something, to that effect, something
Mhm.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the last part of this presentation was really just looking at interim land use, something that's temporary, something that, maybe is not as costly. And you guys are open to it. So that really was the last part, was just saying if that was something that we could even entertain.
Because so many of those things can
Yeah.
be done well now, right? It's not just, 1,000 different tents, bring your own
Right,
thing.
right.
Like you can have it in uniform, look nice and ran properly. Yeah. But we might need to do temporary things to get a total.
So I wanted to provide my perspective. I actually own a food truck and we've been at the Harriman Ice Rink the last couple weekends and we don't do well. I don't know how we could do better. But I think that the food trucks that have been there during the summer and during the winter kind of give you that analysis of how businesses could do there, how small businesses could do in that area.
Yeah, and we've heard some of the food trucks haven't done as well, and I don't know if it's a price point for some of the people that are there with their little kids, or if it's like some stuff, my kids are not gonna eat it. I don't know what kind of food trucks. I mean, if it's ice cream, they'll want to go get it, but if it's sushi or
Yeah,
steak
when I was taking
sandwiches,
when my kids were little and I was taking them to the park, I wasn't spending $10 on an ice cream cone for them.
you know, so, I mean, we have heard that, and it's a little discouraging because you see all these people and you just think, well, there's nowhere else. They're gonna come and eat at my food truck. So, I mean, that's even something that we've talked about, with events, maybe having, you know, which they do the Monday night, the food trucks, but, I mean, it does give you an idea of that, just for the food.
And I think that goes to the combination of things, right? You have to have enough people there and the right demographic. I mean, so what kind of events are going to be there to drive the traffic there, right? I mean, just saying we're going to have a farmer's market isn't necessarily going to bring the people. You know, I live a mile and a half away, and I'm probably not going to make the effort to go over just for a farmer's market. But if my kid's having a ball game there or doing something that's at the state, you know, there's some activity that we're there for, then we probably are going to walk through that stuff and spend some money.
I think my point is though, that right now, the way that it's set up, because we had looked at, like opening a brick and mortar store at City Hall. And so the way it's set up now is that the city would own the land and then the business owner would be expected to build a building. And that's not something a small business owner could do. Like that's totally out of the realm of what a small business can do. And so I think that that needs to be changed. Like either the city needs to build the building and rent it out, or they need to sell the land to a developer to build retail to rent it out.
So I don't know, I'm struggling with this entire conversation because I think that we're in a situation where we're trying to force something in there that we're not 100% sure is the right thing for that piece of land anyways, but because we got given a piece of land a while back saying this is going to be your commercial, we're now trying to force that commercial in there. I'm not saying that we haven't done that in other places in the city, but we haven't necessarily been successful at that in other places in the city either. I really feel like this is, if this is going to be something where we want small businesses, we're going to have to build a building. And the only way I would be comfortable building a building that's going to be there for a long time is if we are using part of it. I mean, in my personal opinion, I see this as we're shooting ourselves in the foot by saying, oh, we have to have some sort of commercial here around City Hall, when 20 years from now, we're going to need more offices. And that's the way it's going to be. Now, how many of those offices? I don't know what we're going to need. I don't think the city has any idea what we need. But at the same time, I'm really struggling to say, okay, well, let's give this over to a developer, sell the land, whatever it is, and then lose complete control of that land. For me, the only way I'm comfortable with anything going there is if we retain control. And so I'm all for, let's get the info. Like, let's go get more information. Let's go do some of these things. But, you know, we want a coffee shop, great. We can put a coffee shop underneath the building, but then we'd have to build a building. And I don't think we're ready to do that because we can't manage to get the public safety building built and the public works building built. I think there's other priorities. And frankly, I just don't see this at the top of the list right now. You know, when in all honesty, there's more important things. And it's not to say that I wouldn't love to see small businesses right next to our city hall. I think it's a great vision, but I'm not sure that vision is realistic. And I would rather see us put some grass down and let kids play on it for a while we figure that out, and spend the $100,000 it's going to take to let people use that space. And for the Halloween event or for whatever event we're using during the summer, let them use that space, than sit here and leave it as a dirt pile and debate endlessly about the fact that we're never going to get a bunch of small businesses there until something else happens. I mean, that's my 2 cents.
Somebody has a comment, you said, Tammy? Oh, Councilman Smith?
Yep, I'm online. You guys hear me okay?
We can.
All right. Sorry for joining the party late. But obviously been on here for a few minutes and listened to the conversation. Just wanted to add a couple of comments myself. Just kind of going back on the history, obviously there was an intended vision when this area was kind of laid out and set up the way that it was way back, obviously when they decided to put the city hall there and how things were laid out around it with the park. And, I think I don't know if there's anyone on the council currently that was able to travel down to South Lake, Texas several years ago. And, there's a lot of concepts and things that were taken really from a very similar layout down in South Lake, Texas, that was very successful to them down there. It had some brownstones right adjacent to the area and the businesses that had been developed out there really in front of City Hall and kind of surrounding the park. And I think that was kind of the vision, obviously, that was intended as they started to really lay out this area. Obviously, there's been a lot that has changed in the way that we do business since that time. And so we have to be, I think the original, as has been mentioned, the original vision and thought of how this would look and feel has certainly changed. And so really that's obviously what the discussion is about tonight is, where do we take it from here, and what do we think is some of the options that we should seriously consider? I know that, what was it, a year and a half or so ago, I can't remember now, Councilman Henderson and Michael and myself, we were able to go to a conference down in San Antonio. No, it wasn't San Antonio. It was, remind me, it's in Texas.
Austin.
Yes. And right there around the hotel that we stayed in, this hotel was really kind of built kind of just on the fringe of really all the other development downtown, and really right on the corner of what was previously a small public street with a lot of small older homes on it. And a lot of those homes had been turned into restaurants and those types of things. And what was interesting as well there is they had basically some lots basically permanently dedicated to food trucks. These food trucks were set up there and they stayed there kind of permanently. And so as Heather asks, what we're open to, I'm open to, like has been said, I want to think outside the box of some of the things that are able to at least do with the land currently, and encourage and kind of test, I guess, some of these theories and hypotheses of what we'll do there. Maybe it is, during the summertime, especially when there's a lot of traffic in the area and in the park, that we have an area. And I know we do that every Monday night, but maybe we look at taking one of those plots and saying, okay, this is dedicated to permanent. You can, leave your vehicle here and operate out of it. But things that think out of the box that way is we really try to grasp. I like studies. I like, kind of having, I guess, the data and the, I guess, something to really look to and is tangible. But I think in this particular case, to me, it's not as much as really what is sustainable there as is what we think is going to be beneficial to the city long term. And I think the mayor has made some good comments there. I think that there are some other things that we potentially need to look at down the road in terms of city uses, city offices, and maybe we do commingle those with some type of first space, retail space, something like that. But I think those are things that we have to kind of really take into account as we talk about that and think outside the box. Because again, I think we all agree the original vision that was put in place for this area now needs to be changed. It needs to be tweaked. But again, as has already been pointed out, there's still a lot of development happening right around this, and there is going to be a lot of people there. So finding, again, that balance of what will be sustainable there and what's going to fit the needs of the city and the vision that we want to create in that area is certainly still up in the air. But I'm open to, just as been outlined tonight, some of these more temporary uses to help us really try and get a foothold in the direction we want to go there. So thanks for letting me barge in for a minute.
I just have two more comments. When I very first came on council, the first training session we had was a gentleman in our community who talked a ton about divergent thinking, right? So think divergently on this thing. We talked about doing an underground city in that little seminar, just all kinds of things. So just think divergently. And then there's been a lot that's been said. I know I've talked to Michael about these types of things too, about understanding your assets as a city. This is an asset that we have. We have ground that's sitting there that is doing nothing positive for us. So I think anything we can come up with that's going to be an asset to the city, we might as well utilize the property that we have to be an asset to us. Well, I agree, preserving it for a long-term use if we need to do something like that, but there's no reason why we shouldn't be utilizing it as a short-term asset.
I just want to clarify one thing. I'm not saying that we should go do a study, right? I'm saying that if you want to have retail space there, go to the companies, and there are many of them who lease land from the landowner, and they build the building, and then they lease it out to the tenants. They have data, they have the research already. We just call them up and say, are you interested in a place like this? What would it take for it to be? And they will give us the information.
How we wanted it to look. And so I think you would have to make sure that you have something in place that if you are selling it to somebody else to develop and build, that if you want it to look a certain way, you're going to have some sort of design standards in place or something so that it will keep that look of the town center unless you don't care. So that's just something that you're going to have to think of if that's the route that we end up going down.
One thing I want to be careful of is, if we go to a retail, I guess, developer and say, hey, can this be retail? And you're like, well, we're thinking of making a government building. If we don't, I mean, us wanting to use it for civic use is, I don't know, if that's our end vision, that's what we should work back from. I worry that there's, for some reason, a need to try to develop everything in 10 years, and it's like you go back and say, oh, this would have been a great place for our civic building if we would have not built whatever we built there. So I just, that's my 2 cents is, yeah, like you said, we need to really say, what do we want it to be in 50 years or 40 years, and look at the life cycle of what we want to do there.
Some of the feedback that we got on the general plan too was that people wanted an outdoor pool somewhere. I'm wondering if we could do something like that in one of those lots.
The biggest problem with an outdoor pool is the operating cost. It's not building the thing, it's operating it. And that, like, the city is in the business of providing critical services, and it's just not feasible at this stage in our growth, operating and paying for that when 6000 West has needed to be rebuilt for 20 years, and we keep putting off because we don't have the funds to build the road, right, or repair the road. And that's from a budgetary point of view. And I know a lot of the council members, we've had these kind of conversations, and we're coming up on budget season. Looking ahead this next 10 years, as the city kind of builds out, we're going to have more and more of our aging, believe it or not, aging infrastructure that has to be rebuilt. And we have to think about maintaining the critical services that we're supposed to provide, rather than saying, let's think about all the fundings we can provide. If we can partner with the county or schools or something and find some way to do it that it makes sense. But I have to tell everybody, at least for me, the city building, owning and operating a public pool, just, we don't have the money.
Yeah, it would have to be a joint operation.
But to the point of, what's the end goal? If we're going to totally change course and use it for civic use, and maybe the property over on 5600 West is better served for commercial, and we look at selling it and moving it, maybe. But I'd rather pursue what we can here and keep the options open as long as possible. And if ultimately the answer is just, look, we've done our best, we've tried everything, it's just not going to happen. We need to change use, great. But I think we're all, I wanted to address Tammy's comment on the aesthetics. At least for me personally, when I first came on the council, there were a couple members that were part of the group that made that decision for this and had this vision, and they were very adamant about that vision. And I'd say none of us are part of that, and I don't think any of us are nearly as concerned about the way it looks looks. None of us took the trip that Clint's referring to, and we don't have that picture in our heads. At this point, like I said, I think temporary stuff can be done well, right? Enough that it's not trash. You don't want just shacks and 10,000 different umbrellas up there right, every weekend sort of thing. But I'd be open to anything. Like I said, if I were to contact a major, commercial real estate entity, that's what they do. They lease property and they build buildings for those specific uses. They'll know what it is, and they'll bring in drawings and say, if we were to do it, this is what it would have to be, right? For the costs for it to pencil, as we always say, right? And then we can say yay or nay. But for me, I can't imagine anything that would be grotesque enough that anybody would bring in that would even be palatable for them to build. So along those lines, same as Clint said, I'm open to anything. If they think it's viable to build that building, I think the issue would be that we'd want consistency amongst the pads. We wouldn't want one type of building over here and a different hodgepodge. I think it's more that consistency among them. But if there were something that were proven to work and someone was willing to build the four, yeah, let's take a look at it.
So this body is comfortable with creative space, just the concept of creative spaces and thinking outside the box and getting something unique and original, if that's what it's about.
I think back to some of the things that we've been shown by we've seen some examples that have been brought to us that apparently we didn't have clear direction on, which is fine. I believe I get that. We are obviously the most clear group in the world, but I didn't have any problem with it as long as it continued to be. I think that consistency of what Jerry. I think one of maybe our concerns was this one looks great, but is the one right next to it going to look completely different?
Yeah, if you have one person come in and they build this, great, and then the next one it doesn't fit together.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with creative space. I was looking online at this salt mine idea of having some open office space or some office space for individuals that can come out and rent a cubicle or a small office or whatever. I think that's great. I would have no problem with that because down the road, as long as it looked consistent with what we together and it made as a cohesive environment for the city, 15 years, 20 years down the road when a lease is up, being able to come in and say, hey, we're going to take that from you. We're going to use that building for city purposes because now we're 20 years down the road and we have the right to lease the land. We can assume that at that point and use that for government space. So I don't have any problem with something like that because I think that does allow us to meet a goal that we have now, but also allows us to plan for a need that we might have in the future. And so if we, that's why I keep saying, I'd love to see something that had some shops on the bottom, but then office space on top. If somebody wants to come in and build a 3-story building that has offices on the top 2 floors and then has, something on the bottom, on the bottom floor with more of a retail feel, I had no problem with that because 20 years, 25 years down the road, when that lease is up, I think that we have an opportunity to convert that to something that's really a benefit to the residents when we actually need it.
Well, and I know one of the design concepts that we were looking at too is having different pitches, and maybe you have some retail on the bottom and some office space on the top that entrepreneurs could use, or it could be used as incubator space, just various options. But then right next to it, you might have kind of a smaller restaurant, and maybe they're just a single story, but on the top they have rooftop dining or just things to make it unique and creative. We also talked about the shipping containers. I mean, there's all sorts of things that we could look at, and that's why we just wanted to see what your vision for that space was, so that we know how to proceed.
And Springville just built something down there with the shipping containers.
So
It's awesome.
As an individual member of the city council, I'm absolutely open to seeing it as long as the overall consistency of all 4 or 6 pads that we have. I mean, I assume the 4 would be separate from the 2 that we are intending to use for government space. As long as those 4 remain cohesive and add to the value of Crane Park, which is a fantastic amenity that we literally have people outside right now using. I don't have any problem with seeing other options.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, I think a lot of valid points, and I appreciate everything. And last thing that I just was thinking is from my perspective, it's a space that provides a service or becomes something that our community enjoys. And I know that's, I think, what everyone would like to see, but it needs to be viable financially. So let's move on. Thank you, Heather, so much. And let's move on to item 1.5, which is discussion of the Harriman City Code to review ordinances relating to design guidelines.
Okay, if you will cooperate,
More
I
brick and
think we
stone.
can actually get through this pretty quickly.
More brick and stone. 90% brick and stone.
So as you know, we talked a lot about this at our last joint meeting, and there were a lot of comments expressed. But in re-listening to that conversation, it was really difficult for me to try and figure out where the majority kind of opinion lies. What I'd like to do is just go through this presentation. If you need to ask a clarifying question, please do. After the presentation, I prepared a series of very simple online polling questions. And from that polling question, a series of questions, I'm just going to look for where's the majority opinion on these topics. And then I will prepare, or we'll follow your direction, and we'll prepare a future amendment for the commission and then the council to consider.
Is that survey? Never mind. We'll talk offline.
Yeah, so it's online and will be just open to just council and commission members only. So it should be, I'm hoping that will be fairly quick. Okay. So it's interesting to consider. This is a home in our community, and I believe it was a Parade of Homes home a couple of years ago. And you'll notice that this particular home doesn't have brick or stone. It was built in a neighborhood that had some exceptions to our single family home standards. I think by most people's standards, this is a beautiful home. This is a welcome addition to our community. It has a great porch. It de-emphasizes the garage by having a side loading garage feature, and obviously has some great landscaping. I didn't take this picture, so I don't know exactly how, it doesn't demonstrate how it relates to the street, but obviously we can have good design without, having brick or stone. Conversely, am I able to drive this, John? Hopefully. Try again. If you can go to the next slide. This was a project in another community that I've worked in. The front is stucco. The side is vinyl. And this is a fairly old home. It's been remodeled. You can see that this is a corner lot. And the property owner decided to have some kind of this faux building coins on the corner that actually wrap around the corner, and that stucco is on top of the vinyl siding. I just always thought this is just, do I need to say it, Jackson? This is just really poor. This is really, really poor. It is just almost comical what someone would be willing to do with their property in the name of trying to dress it up. Anyway, so there is a need for design standards. Next slide. So again, our purpose statement. This is for the entire land use regulation, not just for design standards, but in applying our standards, we really are trying to achieve these very important objectives: public health, prosperity, peace and good order, comfort, convenience, aesthetics, protect our tax base, make sure that our governmental expenditures are balanced, that we're protecting development and property values. Next slide. So what we're looking for is direction for staff. This is kind of the extremes possible direction. One is basically a do-nothing solution. The other is going completely to the other end and doing a lot of work. potentially with a consultant. I'm not anticipating that that's the direction. Either extreme is what the council and commission would prefer. But in the online vote that we'll go through, a poll, that'll be anonymous, it'll be non-binding. So we start with maintaining the existing standards and interpretation. And I'll walk through what I mean by interpretation of those standards. Second option would be maintain those existing standards and then modify some of our interpretations. So third one might be to amend those standards and the interpretation, but basically kind of work with our existing kind of structure, but just kind of do what we do better. The fourth one would be to maintain our standards, which some people have been pushing against, right? We know that there's been concerns with brick and stone percentages. We know that we've had people talk about, hey, a lot of people want lower pitched roofs. Maybe create an alternate standard that tries to address design so that we still have maybe a better design standard, but modifies those brick and stone standards. Maybe we don't have a minimum, or we allow lower pitched roofs as an option within this alternate standard. It would be a staff level draft, and we would base our standards just on kind of best practices. Obviously, that would be in the first draft, and that would be all reviewed by commission and council as you consider it. The last option, again, would be to do a thorough study of what our values are as a community and develop standards and metrics that are specific to what Harriman is trying to achieve. I reviewed one plan like this. It was all encompassing. It was a community in California. They hired an architect who worked with the community for months and developed these standards. Obviously, it's costly. It takes time. Plus, we know that this is an issue that the builders have been lobbying our state legislature on, trying to remove the ability for cities to have design standards. So in doing something like that, we would definitely be kind of flying in the face of some legislative concerns that the state legislature is going to be looking at in the coming session. Any question about those options? Again, it's a range of options from doing nothing to being super aggressive on design. Okay, next slide. So here is the 40% minimum brick or stone requirement. And these are 4 general interpretations that staff has applied over the years, even before I came on board. When we are looking at the front facade and we're thinking about that 40% minimum brick or stone requirement, there's been an interpretation, an administrative interpretation, that we don't include any of the openings. So any door, any window, including the garage door, would be exempt from the facade calculation. So we're just measuring what's left over and then seeing what's left over if it meets the 40% brick or stone. Obviously, if you take the whole area of the front facade and then we apply the 40% brick or stone, we're going to have more brick or stone on these homes. So we have administratively been interpreting that as being, we would essentially have less stone. Now, the reason for that, I was told, was what if somebody wanted to have a lot of windows on their home? Should they be penalized for having, large windows and views? Most people generally think windows are good and we shouldn't penalize them. And so the idea was to exclude these openings. Another thing that's been done is that rear and side facades, although visible from the street, have been generally exempt, primarily for side facades. Yes, you can look down a side yard and see part of that home, but it's generally been interpreted that this standard was, if you stand on the street and you're looking at the front of the home, what's visible? Now, on the rear side of the home, most homes, if it's a double frontage lot, will have another fence. And so there's been this idea that if there is a fence, then the city would not require that 40% brick or stone on the rear of a home, even though it is technically visible from another street. Corner facades the same way. They've been exempted from having that that standard if located behind a fence. Sometimes we've had people tell us they're going to build a fence and then they don't. And then we have a problem because we have to, now we're saying, well, you know, you either got to build your fence or you got to put up a 40% brick or stone. And we've worked through problems like that. Another issue is kind of these faux brick systems, like a brick panel system. You know, should they be allowed? Does that constitute brick or stone? We haven't really addressed this administratively very much. I made a point of it with the Planning Commission on a recent project that appeared. It was a commercial project where I wanted to specify that we use actual brick and not just some kind of faux brick panel. And the commission agreed with that standard. I could be wrong, Jackson, but I think the Maverick has some kind of brick panel. Because you see the seams, yeah, that's not really brick, I think, on that building, or at least not a whole brick. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so those are the interpretations of that brick or stone requirement, and I'm going to be asking you each one of those questions, whether or not you agree with that exemption or not. So, next slide. So here are the breakdown of all of the current standards of our single family home. And again, we'll poll each one of you on these standards. Should we increase it? Should we decrease it? Or should we remove it? So you'll have an opportunity to say, you know, all three of those for each one of these standards. Next slide. Again, this idea of creating maybe an opt-out process. We currently do allow for an application to have a deviation, and that deviation goes to the Planning Commission, and the commission makes the decision whether or not to remove that brick or stone or to change the roof pitch. This would kind of be an incentive to have an administrative process. The idea is we would have, it's an optional process. We potentially could have higher standards as far as the overall design. We're not talking necessarily materials, but just design, the composition of the home. We increase material options. We have more flexibility. We're adaptable to changes in the marketplace. I think in doing this, we would need to remove the minimum brick or stone requirement. That would not be a requirement under this administrative process. Same with the roof pitch. And then what staff would do is we would brief the Planning Commission on those administrative decisions that we're making and adjust the policy as necessary. If we're not achieving the objectives of the city based on the administrative review tools that we have, we could make adjustments as we go along. Any questions about that? Okay. Next slide. Last slide, John. Okay, so next steps. What I would like to do is we're going to jump over to the web-based polling tool. All right, and so the way that you participate in this polling tool is at the top of the screen, you'll see this pollev.com, Michael Malloy 091. So you need to log in using that. I've tried, for some reason, I've tried the text option and it didn't work. This is a free version of this software, so maybe that's not a feature, but the web version does work, and you can do it on your phone or you can do it on your computer. So pollev.com/Michael Malloy 091. And once you're in, we'll just go through these slides. Like I said, the questions will be really simple. Yes or no, or multiple choice. We should be able to get through these questions pretty quickly. Is everybody okay? Like I said, I want to make sure that that I provide clarification if needed, but I think your response to these questions will be pretty simple.
The only question I had in looking at this, and I'll go through it obviously, is I know that as a planning commission, we've talked about, is there a need to increase standards on multifamily and decrease standards on single family.
Right, right. And so right now, we're just dealing with this one part, but you're right. We have talked about that, and that's another part of what we need to be addressing, right? Okay, it looks like we have had 5 people, 7. Okay, so you're already voting, good. How many participants do we have for commission and council?
Mine does too.
So you're all, yep.
Uh-huh.
What's that?
Yeah. Now the whole
Yes, and I'll forward the slides once everybody has done the first question. We'll go to the next
Oh,
one.
so it's only one question at a time.
One question at a time. Yeah. I'm assuming you haven't been able to go to the next one,
Yeah,
right?
I spelled Michael wrong too.
Okay,
Okay.
so we have 8 results.
Well, if my city Wi-Fi works.
Okay, I got in. Did you get in?
So now we put it.
Sorry, Chris, are all of our commissioners here tonight? I mean, online?
Do we support changing?
Wait, I don't know if I saw Andy. I'm not sure if I saw Andy on or not. Yes, we might be on. I haven't heard.
It says, do you support the development of new standards?
Well, that would be ideal,
Top 10
as if
results.
everybody would
Then we move
vote.
Hey, Michael, once you click your answer.
Yeah, so I'm gonna do one at a time. So we've got 10 votes so far.
We need to get this.
And then it goes back to 9. Then it goes
9, oh,
Sorry, Michael. I asked
Is it not
questions,
working?
now we got different answers of what you're asking. This first question. Is this asking, are we in favor of changing things?
yes, do you support the development of design standard? Well, just the idea, do you want design
Or
standards?
do we support the
Yeah,
general idea of having?
yes, yes.
we're going up. Before my phone goes dead, let's move on to question 2. No, you just answered. It's just
It's just stuck there.
wholeev.com.
Make sure.
If you're having a problem, I could,
Do you guys have Android?
I mean, I want to try and protect your
Oh, yeah. I'm on Apple.
anonymity.
Oh, really? Yeah, I'm not on the internet either. I don't know.
If you don't care about me knowing how you voted, you can I can send you the information later and you can tell me. Okay. Should we move on? I've got 12 responses. I think we're looking for
Let's see what we got.
14.
Oh, we're down to 11 again. Somebody change that. Oh, make up your mind.
I told you, I'm
Okay,
technologically challenged.
let's move forward, okay? Next.
Is your answer locked?
Oh, you're right. Here we go. So do we want to increase or decrease design standards? Do you want to keep them the same or do you want to make a change?
This is single family only, right?
Well,
Yes.
Have to keep it the same option.
Oh, that's a good point.
I don't want to increase. Keep it as is.
Yeah, I'm not gonna respond if I'm gonna just do the same.
I guess if you object, if you withhold your vote, I will consider that you want to maintain.
Yeah.
There'll be other questions that'll clarify that. Really?
Well, and where I'm stuck, not to jump ahead, I'm trying to behave myself, Michael, like you asked. But I'm the one who's been driving this on the council side, right? it's probably our fault for not being clear last time. But I have to agree with, I think Chris said it, that I'm not as concerned about modifying or changing single family. I'm open to looking at it, but I think we should be looking at multifamily first. I want to take away the incentives for density and things that have been built in over time. 'Cause
So
it
you,
just- I feel
so
like
you
we
think
start-
99% brick now, right?
They just aren't
First of all.
needed, and the design
Ah, that's-
standards should be raised for multifamily, thereby
Including the garage.
incentivizing the building of
Yeah.
single family.
Could you imagine?
Because the opposite is what's happened, we've
Oh, could you
incentivized the multifamily.
Well, we can get through this, but
And then if we need to adjust single family in addition,
yeah, if the commission and council agrees that we should prioritize multifamily standards first, we could certainly do that. But maybe it would be good to just complete this.
And I think Adam has opinion if he's on.
Finish the poll.
Yes.
Okay. So
What, Chris, my phone keeps cutting in and out. What'd you say?
I'm saying you have an opinion on increasing or decreasing the standard for multifamily, don't you?
Yes, I think we should increase it to very, very deluxe, nice housing.
There you go.
So we have 9 responses so far. Yes, you can. This is supposed to be easy, remember?
Let's jump to the next.
All right, let's go. Oh, there's
The
one
rest
more
are
jumped in.
neutrals.
Okay, next. So this is trying to identify whether or not you think we should try and keep this simple. Just have staff do something, or do you want to go full blown? Okay,
This one's going up faster. We like.
okay. 10 responses. I don't think we've had more than that, so. 11, all right. One more. 12, all right. 13. All right, thank you. Here we go. Oh. So these values are not mutually exclusive. You can achieve both values, but if you had to put one above the other, which one is most important to you?
It is a trick.
It's not a
It
trick
is.
question. Not a trick question. It's just if you,
But are they the more safe ones? Because we could add this.
right now.
okay, we're gonna close this one down here. 11. All right, there we go. 12. Here we go. Next.
Lock your answer.
Okay. So this is where you can just keep the same standards, Jared.
I can't even get down.
I don't know if any of these are right, but
Say, this is where, for me, Michael, it goes, it's a two-part answer. Rather keep seeing, leave single family alone for now, focus on the multi. And then,
And we can, yeah, we can revisit this.
You have to clear that bottom. You have to clear that bottom thing, the blue thing. You just answer the 2 questions.
Okay, 11. Just, all right, I think we're gonna move on. There we go, next. Okay. Fast response, all right, 10.
Done.
Okay. Next. So this is going through those administrative kind of interpretations. What do you think about that? So what we would probably do is clarify this in any future amendment. It, so like I said, this has been an administrative kind of interpretation of what that means. Is it when you're just looking straight on at the home, or if you kind of go around the corner and do that, you can still see the side? Yeah.
Let's do it.
Okay, all right, here we go. Next. So this is for the rear facade.
Just to be clarified, should be set.
Yeah,
Should be set.
right.
Yeah.
So again, this is what we've been doing right now. We have not been requiring that behind, you know, with the idea that they're behind a fence.
Go for it.
All right, next. Yeah, it does it automatically. All right, we're sitting at 11.
Make it happen.
All right, next. So this is where they actually physically cut the brick in half and like set it in some type of mortar. I had one developer tell me that he did this once and he'd never do it again. It was so laborious and it was hard to get it to look good. Yeah, but many do it. They think they're saving money. Okay, next. So this is an idea that these are not really brick or stone, but yeah. I think the next one specifically is stone. All right, here we go. Next. Yeah. And this is synthetic stone. This one doesn't seem to be as much of a problem. It's more the brick that we see substitutions on.
We're good.
Okay. So increase, decrease, or eliminated.
Or maintain the thing. Leave that 40. I abstain.
Okay. I apologize. I just had assumed with all the discussion we had, we were going to change. So I should have had maintain. I should have had that be an option. Ready to roll? 7.
Almost 50% is abstaining.
Okay, we're gonna move on. So the code requires that they submit a material board, physical material board, but we've often been just accepting an electronic version only. But do we want both or just electronic only? The code says physical material board. Okay. All right. Next. And the code also says colors. They're supposed to be telling us colors. Good. 11, 12. All right, we're gonna jump. I heard some people saying they wanted to see the garage get bigger as a minimum, but I don't know if that's a majority. Yeah.
The other issue was, I
Maintain.
remember one development came through that a garbage can would not fit in the garage. It would not fit in the garage. With the
Yeah, so
dimensions of the garage.
if you abstain, we can assume that that's you want to keep it the way it is. All right,
They were good.
next.
Well, when I have to shovel it, I like it.
I think we're good.
Okay. Next. So we do have a minimum square footage size. Again, if you abstain, we'll assume that means you want to just keep that same minimum. Yeah, this is a non-binding poll, so just direction. You can always change your opinion. It just says everything, all, yeah, total. Okay, we're gonna go on. Roof pitch.
Oh,
Yeah.
hey.
The other ones I had assumed that you would want to change, and bad on me.
If it's eliminated, we just simply go with obviously.
Yeah,
like
just,
standard
it would just be building code.
code.
Yep.
It's not gonna cave in. 'cause it's covered
Yep.
That was my knee, I think.
All right, we're gonna move on. I didn't hear any discussion on this, so I begin to assume that maybe maintained was an option that we were comfortable with.
And what determines if a change in elevation maybe needs to be revisited?
Right.
Some of the right next to the edges of huge culvert, change one little thing around the room.
All right, we're gonna 11. There's just a couple more. Yeah. So do we want to allow the planning commission to have the authority to deviate from the design standards? You have to show that it's to achieve better design.
Like the house you first showed.
Yeah. Okay, we got 12. Next. And that's it. You've completed the poll. Okay. That,
Yeah, it was
are we ready to move on to the next agenda topic? Okay. Yeah, we're ready. That was it.
All right. Then let's move on to 1.6, discussion between the flag lot limits.
While you're getting your slides, can I say something, Michael? So this is me again, obviously, this is from a resident in my area trying to do development, you guys are familiar with it. And when they first brought in some kind of layout plans, the way it worked made more sense if they created like the flag lot in the back. And, but they couldn't do that because of the current ordinance. And I guess the reason I, again, bring this up is that we just have so much infill in the city. We have so many properties that were already built, were already there. And then they do developments all around it, and then you have this little one-off infill. And I just think that if we are stringent on the flag lots and say you can't ever do it, then we don't give ourselves a tool to fix some of the infill. And I just think there needs to be some sort of an appeals process or something, and I know there was concern about that because then everybody's gonna try and apply for it, and then we're gonna be inundated. I don't think there's that many lots that are gonna be having those kinds of problems. I know that the intent, like you mentioned earlier, was to try and make it so we don't have all these acres come in and chop them in half and change the integrity of the neighborhoods. I totally agree with that. But I think that we just created a problem by addressing that problem, but then we've created another one that we don't have a solution for. And so I just think there needs to be some language in there that allows for a solution to be found if it makes more sense to have a flag lot. That's the reason that's back on the agenda.
So in your packet, I included some potential red lines, really more just for you to react to. Maybe it addresses what you're looking for, maybe not. So I think we all understand. Apologize, this image got shifted and yellow highlighted area got moved off of the flag lot. I'm confident we all understand what a flag lot is. Yeah. Next slide. That was working before. There we go. Okay, so our current ordinance was adopted in 2017. This was an amendment, and it was specifically designed to increase restrictions on flag lot development. We added several new standards. We made it more restrictive. I looked at what was happening in other cities around us. So this was included in your packet. All cities allowed them. On dwelling unit, what I was specifically asking about or looking for is, we currently allow one home on a flag lot. Some cities, like Bluffdale, does not have that limit. It basically just defaults to what's the underlying zoning required. But they did not have a limit. So you could have more than one home off of a flag lot. South Jordan, as you can see, had a limit of 2. West Jordan had 1 like us. On streets, we limit to what's called residential only. You're not able to do it on arterial or collector of either type, whether it's minor or major. You can see what some of our other cities require. Some are not specified in their ordinances. Bluffdale does say you can have it on a collector and arterial as long as it's a shared access. Minimum acreage, mostly limited by zone. We require a minimum half acre regardless of the zoning type. So it has to be at least a half acre. And then South Jordan, for example, said twice the area of the original recorded subdivision, which is kind of unique. Fencing, we're unique in that we require privacy fencing around the flag lot. None of the other cities do that. And that sometimes has been a problem. It really hasn't accounted for maybe existing fencing or maybe other kind of features that property owners are trying to work around. So we require more than other cities. And additional standards, I was looking for like something that was just different than just typical engineering standards. Really, I didn't see a lot there. West Jordan had a maximum length on the stem of 330 feet. Bluffdale says a turnaround may be required, but that I think would fall under typical engineering or what the fire code would require. It's interesting, one of the codes I reviewed had this statement in it. This is not our code. At the bottom it says, it is not the intent of this chapter to allow the proliferation of multiple flag lots along a given street within a subdivision or to change the zoning or character of a subdivision. And I think that kind of speaks to the spirit of what we have tried to do maybe in 2017 is we're very concerned about how flag lot changes the look and feel or character of the neighborhood. Maybe we could add some more clarifying language to our ordinance. So I just went through and started looking at what are some basic changes that might reflect an interest in broadening our ordinance a little bit. One of the things is technically the definition says a flag lot is in a residential zone. Well, we've been doing it in both agricultural and residential zones. I think that's more generic. But I wanted to clarify that, or would propose that we clarify that. And again, that we're talking lot frontage requirement for the zone. So just a clarification. This is where a possibility that we reintroduce flag lots on we reintroduce flag lots, but not on a major collector or arterial. So a minor collector would be allowed if we made this change. So this is basically going up one street above a residential street.
Can you give us examples of
Yeah, and that was in the staff report. I had some examples of what types of streets those are like.
It's a 60-foot or.
Yeah, I think it's in the report.
So like, for instance, let's take the example of 6,000 for the old city building. Would that allow flag lots? Because I know right now it does not.
I think that's a minor collector, so it does not, that's right.
It does not.
Yes, they would allow it with this change.
Yes.
Changing would allow.
Yes. Okay.
I'm driving that road, no way.
So here, we've had some problems when people have tried to fit everything in within the kind of the flag lot area or the stem portion. And I wanted to be clear that they need to account for the landscaping, any berming or swells or fencing, making sure that they design that stem to be wide enough to accommodate all of those requirements. We had one that they did 20 feet, but we needed 20 feet clear to meet fire code, and they didn't have room to put the fence and have the 25 feet or 20 feet of pavement.
What is the fire code 150 feet or 200 feet on a project, do you know?
Typically, they want to turn around. I think it's after 150. Yeah. And then this was another provision in the current ordinance. I think we were trying to say we didn't want a flag lot that was in a subdivision that had already been recorded or subdivided. But the way it reads is it looks like you can't do a subdivision if you have more than 2 lots in it. So this would kind of clarify that, but it goes back to. Right, exactly. That's how I was interpreting it, but I think it was, if the subdivision was already existing. So if you look at the previous subdivision plat, if there was one that had more than 2 lots in it previously, then you couldn't do a flag lot. Yeah, but the plain reading of the language doesn't say that.
So, to me, just removing it would not be sufficient. Something else that we have. But very, very simply says subdivision, a previously divided subdivision, two lots, not.
Yeah. So what this would do, this would allow you to, let's say you're doing a new 10 lot subdivision, and one of the lots is a flag lot. This would allow you to do that. We could have another standard somewhere else that would say, if you're in a previously recorded subdivision, we wouldn't allow you to do it. Yeah. Right. Okay. Okay.
I think if we're gonna allow them, Michael, I think that we need to be very limited. I don't think they should be in big bulk projects like that.
Okay. Again, this is just I think a clarification of the language. Just saying that the front yard of the flag lot shall be deemed to be that side nearest to the dedicated public street. I just think it just is easier to read and understand. And then it currently says that modifications would be determined by staff on a case-by-case basis. I was just putting in specifically who has that authority. This could also be the community development director, just whoever that person is who has that authority.
Keeps it universal.
Yeah. This again is we do allow other kinds of fences besides vinyl. And so this is just saying it's a privacy fence that we're requiring. There could be other material that's permitted under the code. And again, we've had problems with requiring this, but then we create a double fencing problem for somebody who already has an existing fence. And it's been an issue sometimes before the planning commission. And so I wondered if we might want to have the authority, give the planning commission the authority to modify that, if that is an issue.
Part of the reason you do a privacy fence specifically is to avoid the impact on neighbors that aren't going to be happy.
True. In this provision, you have, so this isn't taking away that requirement. It's just saying if there's already a fence there, now you've got to, we don't allow double fencing. So now you got to go work with your neighbor and say, I need to take down your fence so I can put my fence up. That's required by the.
Another example is off of 5600. There could be a flag lot that goes back, and then there's a commercial entity behind it, which they'll put a precast wall in eventually. And so there are some exceptions that
Yeah. So again, options, we maintain the current city code. We could consider other amendments, different amendments. Could allow more than one single family lot to be accessed from a shared access like we've seen in other cities. Maybe you limit it to 2 or 3 lots. We prohibit flag lots in previously recorded subdivisions, clarify that, anything else.
Comfortable making changes, clarifying things, but I think no way you want to make it less strict. I get there might be some residents that might be, feel that this is unnecessarily strict, but watching request after request after request come in for these flag lots and driving down 64 West and seeing a number of flag lots in a single road. This will put in for a reason, and I have we'll be sharply close to less strict. That's fine.
I agree with you. The one thought that I had on the allow more than one single family lot to be accessed, the one you just had.
Oh, sorry.
to be accessed from the shared access one, 2, and 3. The one thought I have there is, if we're making access to the flag and access to the house, we have 2 cars leaving at the same time potentially. But if there's one access, only 1 car can get out and 1 car can get out. And so I actually think it sort of limits the impact if that is allowed. And so it almost makes it to where this is almost not even a driveway. It's almost the road that goes back to that house and this house. And so, yeah, but I just like how it limits the impact.
But would just disallow.
Yeah.
So I just think that I think that, again, we go back to the same thing, it's the integrity of the neighborhood. I don't think that, I think the strictness of the flag law is to protect the integrity of the neighborhood, right? And safety is his other issue as far as, just like you're saying, 6,000 West. You gotta make sure it makes sense and structure it so that if it's flag lot, like the one that I just sent to, and I'll explain that to you in a second. There's 3 homes already sitting back there. There's already flag lots created, right? But the way they want to design it is to bring the traffic back in here and create the flag lot back here. So it's just dumping out into this little residential road and going this way. And alleviating some of the traffic that's dumping off onto the busy road, because you can't do that right now because it's prohibited in the law. So we're just kind of stepping on ourselves by not allowing ourselves to make decisions that go, okay, yeah, this one makes sense to do it this way. The design works better and the traffic flow works better. And it's the integrity of the neighborhood is the same, right? But anyway, that's, if we could fix it to where you guys can review it, or we can review it and say, okay, yeah, I can see what you're asking for that. That makes sense to do it that way. I don't know how to put that into language.
I would like to see where this actually applies, maybe look in our community and see what would apply. So we can actually see, are we doing it for a few areas or are we doing it carte blanche?
So Adam, as you could see, the one big change is allowing flag lots on a minor collector. So everything else is really kind of modifying what we currently allow. That one standard would expand it.
And I mean, from the time when Adam and I started to now on the City Planning Commission, we see a lot less flag lots than we used to.
I was gonna say, I swear the first 3 years of being a planning commissioner was creating this standard, so.
Yeah, because we'd see flag lots every couple months, they'd be coming in on a regular basis.
So I agree with Sherry, it does make sense to have some limitations to allow it. But I think opening it up just to say, depends on how much you cry, is not what we should do. So I think we should maybe pick a different area or
agrees with you,
or
Adam.
look and evaluate where they are, because this will impact a lot of areas more than anywhere else.
Hard to try it. I agree with you 100%. We have to figure out some sort of language that makes it tight enough that it's just not try harder and maybe you'll get what you want. I agree. But I just want to have some sort of tool, if it makes sense to do it a different way, then you can do it a different way.
Well, because we have one right now that's up on 7300 West that we approved the zone, but it showed 3 flag lots created with that property instead of a simple subdivision.
But there's three flag lots that are kind of down. It just redesigns it so that the private lane dumps into the cul-de-sac rather than out on 7530. Have you looked at both drawings?
And I think those ones we should not do. I understand the occasional 1s or 2s, but I think I think we need to have it the way it is, because I think there is more impact than what we're looking at. But I'm happy to look at it again.
So it sounds like there may be interested in considering minor collectors, but with additional standards, not just simply any minor collector anywhere. There's probably certain additional standards.
My answer to that is I'm not in favor
Oh,
of that. I don't
okay.
All right,
Okay,
I think that's gonna wrap it up unless there's another comment. Sherry, are we good?
Yeah, yeah,
All
sorry.
right.
I'm just showing him the 75/30.
Sounds good. Future meetings, planning commission meeting Thursday, January 7th, 2021. City council meeting Wednesday, January 13th, 2021, both at 7 o'clock. Look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, Adam and Lauren, all in favor?
All right.
Thank you, guys. Have a great night.